9, 3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are, and for some ungodly reason you still have the boredom to watch this show. Welcome to another edition of the World So Far Report, the 5th episode. As always, alongside with me is my colleague Viktor Kainik.
Shalom.
Alrighty, so first of all, I would like to remind you that this show exists solely because you give Shekelim. If you don't give Shekelim, then the show gets quarantined. It gets sickened with SARS-CoV-2. freedomalternative.com//donate, so please give Shekelim. If you want to send us news, or if you want to curse at us, or God forgive, to praise us, topics at freedomalternative.com. Don't forget to subscribe on our BitChute profile as well. Gives crypto so you can subsidize the poor Romanians so they can watch the sofa in the Romanian language as well on BitChute. We usually have quite a lot of troubles with the Romanian language podcast due to copyright strikes, so BitChute becomes very, very useful in that regard. Alrighty, last week I promised that we're switching to a once in 2 weeks model, but that's gonna have to be postponed a little bit because election season is coming up, so obviously next week we'll be here.
Yeah, next week we're gonna comment who's going to win.
Yeah, we're gonna comment the result, of course, of the US election, but most importantly then I'm gonna have to work on the Romanian election season, so this podcast will take a break until the Romanian election. But this channel will be busy with videos with me alone while the podcast is taking a break, so don't worry, it's not going to be radio silence here as well. Alrighty, so starting of course with North America, Amy Coney Barrett got confirmed.
Oh yes.
Rivers of leftist tears have flown as a result of this event. Even Mitt Romney voted for her. Eventually, I think one Republican senator voted against. So once again, go Cocaine Mitch.
Yes, indeed.
Nobody can disagree with Cocaine Mitch. That's why I wasn't concerned at all about this. Last week, I got a private message. Why did you speak about Amy Coney Barrett? And I'm like, don't worry, Cocaine Mitch will fix it. Cocaine Mitch said about a month ago, I have all the votes, no worries, it's gonna happen. And I'm like, if he said so, then that's probably going to be the case. I mean, you know, the previous 3 times that was the case. I mean, he told Obama, no, you're not getting a Supreme Court nomination, and he didn't. And then Trump nominated the 2, and every time he said, yeah, I got all the votes, no worries, and that happened. So, you know, 4th time he said, I have all the votes, no worries. I had to trust Cocaine Mitch, and obviously that was...
Cocaine Mitch delivers.
Cocaine Mitch delivered.
Unlike his ship.
Yes. Yes. So, you know, a thumbs up to Cocaine Mitch. I was looking for, because I didn't prepare an article for this, I'm part of the effort to shorten the episodes. I was looking for an article, I don't know, Huffington Post or something, with the rivers of tears. Even Huffington Post had to abstain from this. They didn't. The last thing they published about Mrs. Barrett was like a month ago, and she said, oh my gosh, she's from a sect and whatever, but nothing recently.
So I've seen that as well.
So it seems that even liberals are like, okay, well, we lost this one, bro. I mean, you know, it kind of happens. Yeah, the most recent piece of leftist whining that I was able to find, of mainstream leftist whining, was on the New York Times, a former newspaper. They published exactly a month ago. They said Amy Coney Barrett she delivers on the 2 most important aspects for conservatives, namely that she's an originalist and she strongly disagrees with Roe v. Wade, and also she's propagandistically useful because she can undermine the other women in the court, which I was like, yeah. Yeah. Now,
well, of course, I wouldn't have any lesser expectations from somebody who isn't exactly a copy of Antonin Scalia, but pretty close.
Yeah. With that said, I will have to make this statement to be on public record, because several years from now I'm going to rewind here and say, I told you so. I don't think Amy Coney Barrett will be the conservative firebrand that many of the conservative pundits have made her to be.
She definitely won't be.
I mean, how should I put this? Well, first of all, she's a woman, so there's that. But most importantly, I think many conservative pundits have missed the point, and have been missing the point over the last several years, at least over the last decade, I would argue. When Republicans make nominations to the Supreme Court, they still, to this day, do not look up for militant conservative activists. They don't. Now, sometimes that turns out to be the case, but that's rare. As a standard, they don't look up for that. They look for people who judge starting from the premise that the Constitution says what it says and it doesn't say what it doesn't say, and that's it. And use that as a template to judge cases. Because from the constitutionalist perspective, if you want the Constitution to say, I don't know, unalienable right to an abortion, for instance, well, then pass an amendment to the Constitution and make it say that. And that's okay. But you cannot say that it says so right now, because it doesn't. And Roe v. Wade was decided wrongly. So, you see my point? The same thing with, what's the other controversy? Homosexual marriage. Same thing. Mm-hmm. There is nothing in the US Constitution that says anything about marriage at all. From a constitutionalist perspective, the federal government has absolutely no business whatsoever in marriage at all. Doesn't matter how, be it polyamorous, polygamous, homosexual, it doesn't matter. The federal government has no business in that. And the same thing, I think Antonin Scalia wrote the dissenting opinion on that when he said, look, if you want this, then pass an amendment. Sure, make the Constitution say what you want it to say, but right now it doesn't.
Well, that's the thing. The Republicans, let's remember, they are the ones who just a while ago believed that they are above propaganda, fighting with the same weapons that Democrats are fighting the propaganda war. But at least they're moving to the right direction.
Yes.
Let's hope so that they will indeed finally consider becoming militant conservatives as well. Because principles cannot be negotiated.
If Trump wins, I'm hoping that his next Supreme Court will be a militant conservative. Because fuck you, that's why. I'm serious, because fuck you, that's why. Because the Democrats, if the Democrats had the opportunity to nominate 3 Supreme Court justices, they would have nominated 3 Tanya Sotomayors. Period.
Oh, yeah.
They would have never hesitated to do so, right? So, and the idea that the Republicans should be, but we're above that, and that's what got you all into the current mess. So yeah, I don't think Amy Coney Barrett will be the conservative firebrand that many pundits have made her to be, both on the left and on the right. One thing I do hope it will be true, it will be the concern that the Clinton News Network has expressed, namely that with the addition of Assistant Justice Barrett to the court, there might be enough wind within the court to overturn the so-called gay marriage decision, because that one was obviously wrongly decided. I mean, it's even wronger than Roe v. Wade. I'm hoping that will be the case, but other than that, I don't expect anything really spectacular from Mrs. ACB. Other than that, I don't know. Admittedly, it was hard to oppose her. She has 7 kids, so therefore she's accustomed to answering stupid questions for hours and hours on end. So, those of you who've watched the hearings, it was easy for her. It's just a lot of spoiled children asking dumb questions for hours and hours on end. Right. All right. Moving further, Reuters: 4 in 10 supporters of Biden Trump would not accept election defeat, says a Reuters Ipsos poll. More than 4 in 10 supporters of both President Trump and his Democratic challenger Joe Biden said they would not accept the result of the November election if their preferred candidate loses, says the poll. The survey conducted from October the 13th till October the 20th shows 43% of Biden supporters would not accept a Trump victory, whilst 41% of Americans who want to re-elect Trump would not accept a win by Biden. Smaller portions would take action to make their displeasure known. 22% of Biden supporters and 16% of Trump supporters said they would engage in street protests or even violence if their preferred candidate loses. U.S. election officials are dealing with a series of challenges this year that have raised concerns about the public's confidence in the result. Top national security officials warned last week that Russia and Iran have been hacking into U.S. voting systems and looking for ways to undermine the election. Trump also repeatedly questioned the integrity of U.S. elections, arguing that the process is rigged against him and repeatedly asserting without evidence that the surge in mail-in voting this year will increase the likelihood of voter fraud. He has refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power if the vote count indicates that he lost. Donald Green, a political scientist at Columbia University, said the poll results ease his concerns about post-election violence, but he warned that if the election is close or one candidate can make a credible accusation of voter fraud, it could spark wider discontent and protests than the poll suggests. That's why many people who oppose Trump are holding their breath and hoping for a lopsided outcome that is not up for grabs. The latest poll shows Biden leads Trump by 8 percentage points nationally. Fake news. 51% of likely voters say they are backing the Democratic challenger, whilst 43% are voting for the incumbent president. Biden also is ahead in Wisconsin and Michigan. That's definitely fake news, but the race appears to be much closer in other battleground states, including Pennsylvania, Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina. The Reuters Ipsos poll was conducted online in English throughout the United States. It gathered responses from 2,649 American adults, including 1,039 who said they voted for Trump or were planning to vote for him, and 1,153 said that they were similarly backing Biden. The poll has a credibility interval, a measure of precision of 4 percentage points. All right, so basically someone put a poll on some godforsaken forum hosted by a Democrat server, and they basically said that. First of all, notice that they upfront admit that they oversampled Democrats, which is quite funny. And I say it's quite funny because just before I took the luggage with the equipment to get over here, I watched a video with very, very bright colored hair, very leftist woman who basically said, you know what, I voted for Trump, fuck this shit. I ain't voting for pedos, man. I mean, really.
Yeah, there is a line and they just crossed it.
Yes. Now, let's be clear on this. It doesn't matter who wins. There will not be any kind of violence. There won't be. At least not in the way these people seem to imagine. Because again, you know, even when Trump won the first time, yeah, sure, there was that very famous liberal lady who screamed no at the inauguration. But really, did anything really serious happen? Not really, no. If anything, things were a little bit more violent at the midterms, yes. But immediately after Trump's election, not really. Again, did conservatives went into a full igloo when Obama was re-elected? No. No, they didn't. No. Or when Bush was re-elected? No, not really.
Yeah, and then actually remember that the Bush-Gore campaign was even more widely disputed.
Oh, and the one in 2000.
Because the Supreme Court overturned that election.
Yes.
There would have been bigger chances for an actual boogaloo to start.
And it didn't happen. And well, admittedly, Bush at that time, he wasn't a polarizing figure. If you remember the Bush campaign, the first one in 2000, was a pretty tame campaign. It basically campaigned on the No Child Left Behind, on the educational policies and things like that. I mean, it wasn't really a disputed campaign. And you know, he was campaigning against a highly discredited Democrat Party because at the time it was just the end of the Clinton era, you know, the Lewinsky scandal and things of that nature. So you know, that's why I said when Bush was re-elected, because in 2004 George W. Bush was a lot more a lot more of a polarizing figure. And of course, he used the situation to his advantage. He campaigned as a wartime president, and that's how he got reelected. Just like Trump is doing now, he's campaigning as a wartime president. In both cases, it's bullshit, of course, but it's how politics works. Now I like it that they claim that there is such thing as Biden supporters. Who the hell are those people? I mean, really.
No.
Who is a Biden supporter? Can you please introduce me to 10 people that are legit Biden supporters? I'm not saying Democrats. I'm not saying Trump opponents. No, I'm saying Biden supporters. People who can honestly, in good conscience, make an argument for Biden, not against Trump.
Yeah, we're totally curious to hear what they have to say.
I mean, seriously, if there's any Democrats watching this, please do make the case for Biden. Without mentioning Trump once. Just make the case for Biden, not for Harris. Okay? Make the case for Joe Biden, please.
It would actually be even more difficult to make the case for Harris, considering a track record.
Admittedly, but it's easier to make the case for Harris because at least she's not a pedophile or an internationally corrupt politician getting enriched from the office. So it's actually easier.
Yeah,
it's still easier for Harris than for Biden. No, seriously, because I might say something inappropriate here, but as a propagandist, one of the jobs that I have to do is to get myself very familiar with the arguments of the opposition. And I have been unable to find a pure, clear, pro-Biden argument. And the election is just a few days from now. And I still haven't found a pro-Biden argument. Yeah, there are plenty of arguments against Trump, and some of them are pretty legitimate. But I haven't seen any argument pro-Biden, and that's why I'm asking, what is the case for Sleepy Joe? I mean, seriously, can anyone make the case for Sleepy Joe?
Yeah, well, it will be surprising that Biden ran on an anti-Trump agenda, but like a political party in Romania has learned this tough lesson. You can't run.
Two have learned, not just one.
Well,
two
actually, yeah, indeed. They learned that saying "fuck Trump" or "fuck the current political party" does not stand in place of policy. What happens after?
Yeah, it cannot replace your political program. So not to mention that, unlike the last time, the Democrat nominee doesn't have the support of the police, doesn't have the support of many prosecutors. I mean, Kamala Harris should be able to wield her influence amongst the prosecutorial offices. She can't. The prosecutors are pro-Trump. So even in many bureaucracies, which usually are democratic strongholds, usually, for obvious reasons, even there, people are, you know what, Trump. No, seriously, just Trump. I mean, come on, give me a break. No. Not to mention, I've seen, I think it was Boston Herald. It's one of these newspapers that traditionally endorses Democrats, and they're like, the Democrat taxation plan is just absolutely haram. Please vote Trump.
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't the Boston Herald. It was the Washington Times that endorsed Trump.
Yeah, but Washington Times traditionally endorses Republicans. No, I'm talking about a paper that traditionally doesn't endorse Republicans. In any event, because I think it was Boston Herald, because yes, it was Boston Herald for sure. I'm going to put the link in the description, because it's the same newspaper that frustrated the campaign for Senate of a Republican black lady who made a very viral campaign video in which she basically walks around the city in all of the places that were destroyed by Democrat policies. It's just like, do you want some more of this? How about for once just vote Republican? Right.
Well, you can't go worse than the last guys.
Yes, and in the case of at least the neighborhoods she was showing in the video, and I've been through some of those. Yeah. I mean, even if I were illiterate and had no idea whatsoever about what the Republicans are up to, or for or against, it doesn't matter, I would have still voted Democrat. I would have still voted Republican precisely because they just can't be worse than these people. Right. So yeah, I'm not afraid of this kind of thing, violence, and I find it, at some point it becomes frustrating when so many conservative pundits are talking about And not just conservative pundits, really. I mean, liberals have picked up on this too, using civil war kind of thing. Guys, some of you are too young, I guess. But you know, I wasn't in the United States in the 60s. Look up what happened in the 60s. You know, the most peaceful protest in that era was still a lot more violent than the most violent protest in 2020 or 2019 or 2018 or 2016. Okay? I'm just saying. And compared to a civil war, none of the protests in the last decade come even close to that. Because if you keep using civil war, it becomes a demonetized term or delegitimized. And then if there will be a situation of civil war, nobody will take it seriously anymore because you've overused it.
Choose your words wisely.
Yeah, I know a few publications who overused, you know, Putinist as a label, and yeah, well, nowadays when legit Putinists come in, they're like, oh, but you know, the other three dissidents were Putinists as well. This one is a Putinist. Well, maybe he isn't. Who cares? That's what happens, right? Clinton News Network: conservatives push to discredit Facebook, Twitter and Google just days before the election. A right-wing offensive is underway to discredit social media companies just days before the election. What began as complaints about anti-conservative censorship by social media companies has now evolved into outright allegations of election interference, as high-ranking Republicans have accused online platforms of helping Democrats by way of their content moderation decisions. On Wednesday, the Senate Commerce Committee is set to grill CEOs of Facebook, Gulag and Twitter amid right-wing cries of partisanship and threats to change a critical law known as Section 230 that protects the company's ability to moderate content as they see fit. Outside experts have found little evidence to support claims of widespread systematic political bias in Silicon Valley's technology. Yeah, sure. But the conservative allegations are an explosive charge and a dramatic escalation ahead of Election Day. They reflect not only the stakes of the race, but also the fact that Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube have become key parts of America's democracy for better and for worse, and now fair game for a party with a habit of working the refs. The Commerce Committee isn't the only one looking to put tech execs in the hot seat. Last Thursday, Senate Judiciary Committee Republicans voted to authorize subpoenas for Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, and would compel them to testify about conservative censorship. As with traditional media, conservatives have long complained of unfair treatment at the hands of social media platforms. But that critique shifted into overdrive this month with the election looming. The high-profile demands for executive testimony are just one way that conservatives are dialing up the pressure on big tech. Senator Josh Hawley, one of the tech industry's most vocal antagonists, sent a letter to Facebook and Twitter this month characterizing some of the company's content moderation decisions as illegal campaign contribution benefiting former Vice President Joe Biden. Hawley has encouraged President Trump's campaign to file a complaint to the Federal Election Commission. The Republican National Committee actually did so, accusing Twitter on October the 16th of being Biden's media operative and of perpetuating a feud with Trump, which is true. The flurry of accusations has created a right-wing firestorm aimed at forcing social media platforms to treat conservative content more permissively, and in the event they refused to broadly delegitimize the platforms at a time when millions are relying on their services for accurate information about voting and the pandemic. Experts in critical communication say that what Cruz, Hawley and other Republicans are doing right now fits a long-time pattern. We could have called this like a CW show from the year 2000, said Dave Karpf, a political scientist at George Washington University. You can predict every beat that will happen. Independent studies of social media have found little credible evidence to suggest that the technology is biased against right-wing viewpoints. Trump, Fox News, the political commentator Dan Bongino, and other right-wing stalwarts consistently dominate rankings of the top-performing posts on Facebook, according to data from CrowdTangle, a Facebook-owned data analysis tool used widely by many outlets, including CNN, to survey the social media landscape. Social media platforms have also given prominent conservatives the benefit of the doubt. For years, they took a hands-off approach to Trump's comments on social media that otherwise would have violated their policies, crafting ever more elaborate loopholes that allowed them to turn a blind eye. The Wall Street Journal has reported that after Facebook tweaked its algorithm in 2017 to reduce low-quality political content, policy executives were concerned about the outsized impact of the changes on the right, prompting Zuckerberg to approve plans to suppress left-leaning content more. In a statement to the journal, Facebook said its changes were never meant to target any single publisher, but it did not dispute the report. It was not until this spring that Twitter and then Facebook began more aggressively applying labels and in some cases removing some of Trump's misleading claims about COVID-19 and mail-in voting decisions that incensed Trump and his allies, prompting the president to call for government regulation of social media that the digital rights group has alleged it's unconstitutional. Yeah, good luck with that. I do want to separate the good faith critiques of Section 230 and the questions surrounding antitrust, which are legitimate shots said. That's not what this upcoming hearing is about, and that's not what this effort 2 weeks out from the election is. This is about bludgeoning these CEOs into submission. Okay, so no matter how hard tech platforms seek to win conservatives' approval, it is becoming increasingly clear that nothing will stop the attacks over alleged political bias, says Karpf. That's because he said sowing distrust in the medium is precisely the point. Yeah, so there's no set of things you can do to get Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz not to complain about this because it is strategically useful to complain about it, says Karpf. A troubling side effect of the conservative attacks is the politicization of social media technology itself, said McGregor, which is a problematic when so many Americans now use social media to get their news. We can disagree about information, McGregor said, but to say that there is some grand conspiracy perpetrated by the legacy media and tech platforms to silence Republicans is a step beyond that, and it delegitimizes these mechanisms. We have to get people information. Several experts said the GOP's efforts to discredit social media companies is similar to how it has politicized executive agencies, cast aspersions on federal inspectors general, and violated long-standing political norms over judicial appointments and confirmations. Fuck off. If you undermine these institutions that can provide a check on your power, then power is unlimited, Mike McGregor added, and then that's not a democracy. Whack! Someone call the ambulance. No. First of all, this is ridiculous. Do I really have to comment on this? Okay, yeah, I have to. First of all, the social media is not a constitutional institution, so it can be undermined and attacked politically however we deem fit, just like however the liberals deem fit. You know, it's a tool, it's a toy.
Just like the big media,
Yes.
big tech undermined the conservatives. Remember 2016?
Yeah.
By any chance?
Yeah, this whole idea that, but you know, if you undermine they provide a check on your power. No, it's not the business of Twitter to provide a check on government's power. It's not. And this idea, it doesn't matter what you do, you'll never win conservatives' approval. That's wrong. No, you can do something. Stop censoring political content, period. That's easy. You don't have to do anything really to please conservatives. You just have to stop doing the things you're doing now. It's not complicated. Because again, you've never seen conservatives complaining about 4chan or Gab or Parler. Why? Because they don't censor. It's easy. Don't censor. It's not complicated. It really isn't complicated. And this whole idea, but it's an effort to bludgeon the CEOs into submission. Yes, so what's so wrong about that? At the end of the day, no matter how big you are as a company, and let's not forget Twitter is a small company. It really is a small company. I mean, this whole idea that Facebook, yes, it's pretty big, but Twitter is not. Twitter is, it's like comparing mom and pop store with Walmart. Twitter is the mom and pop store. Okay. And Facebook is almost Walmart.
Yes, but people get that impression because Twitter apparently has a lot of influence, but in reality, yes. that comparison stands.
Yeah, but they have a lot of influence, but they're not a big company. And as a result, who are you, the mom and pop store, to censor the president?
Oh.
Because that's what they did.
Yeah.
And that's why the Republicans are pissed. And they have a reason to be pissed. I don't care who you are. You don't get to censor the President of the United States, period, at all.
And not just censoring the President. Remember last week we've talked about Twitter censoring the federal state itself.
Yes, and they censored, websites of the Congress. And who the hell are you people? And just like I think Ted Cruz asked point blank exactly like this to Jack Dorsey, I'm sorry, who the hell elected you? And that's a fair question. I mean, seriously, no. Just no. And but we conducted an independent event. I don't care. I don't care. First of all, I don't believe you. I don't care about your independent investigation because it's not independent and we all know it isn't. Okay? Because that's the thing, we all know it isn't.
Yeah. That investigation was just a smokescreen. You could appoint literally anybody.
Again, a smokescreen at best. I don't think there even was an investigation. It was just two liberals in an office at Twitter. They just wrote a report. I'm pretty sure that is the case. And look at this, the sort of thing that it's meant basically to discredit. Say, oh, but to assert that there is some grand conspiracy. Oh, that's a bit. First of all, nobody asserted it's a grand conspiracy. Conspiracy would mean that nobody knows it. And, there is hush-hush about it. There's nothing hush-hush about what's happening at Twitter. We all know what's happening at Twitter. Jack Dorsey said it himself. Basically, he employed 100% far leftists and people who hate America, mostly foreigners on H-1B visas, who they have a very common understanding about things, which happens to be a common understanding that is the enemy of the First Amendment. It's not a conspiracy. If you hire 100% leftists, you'll be having a leftist company. It's not complicated. There doesn't have to be a conspiracy. And there doesn't have to be a conspiracy in employment either. People tend to hire people that are similar to them, that resemble them.
Yeah.
Why does it have to be a conspiracy?
No, it definitely isn't a conspiracy. But what was hilarious is that I've seen yesterday a video posted by Jack Dorsey himself, crying about Section 230. That was particularly hilarious.
Why does he complain about it? Because at least
I'm pretty sure he knows that the steamroller is coming for social media.
Right, I guess. But yeah, I really don't understand what is this. But it is strategically useful to complain about it. Yes, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because you identified something that resembles political operative kind of work, which in this case is true, that doesn't make it wrong. But then again, this guy is a Democrat, and Dem operatives lately
pretty weak sauce.
They're pretty weak sauce, yes. So to say that it's grand conspiracy, it delegitimizes these mechanisms. Okay, so even if that is the case, even if Twitter ends up being delegitimized, so what? And why are we pretending that this would somehow be such a huge loss? Did the free flow of information got affected when MySpace went bananas? No. Will anyone seriously be harmed if Twitter goes bananas? No. Even Jack Dorsey will be fine. He has a lot of millions for himself. He doesn't have to work a single day for the rest of his life. Good for him. I'm not envious. But what I'm saying is that this whole crap about, that would be delegitimizing it. So what? Companies have a lifespan. And maybe Twitter has reached end of life. Maybe. Is that so bad?
Well, apparently for those doing damage control, particularly in this time, it is for them. Yeah. Which is why they're resorting to accusing of grand conspiracies and stuff.
Yeah, and the article is even longer from CNN, and they claim, but in 2016 Facebook helped Republicans and what? So what?
What?
Well, sort of, not really. I mean, Facebook had a program in 2016 that basically invited both parties to come in and play with a tool that would help them identify voters and whatnot. The Democrats refused to show up. The Republicans did show up and grabbed the tool and used it. And now the Democrats are complaining that, oh my God, we didn't use the tool. Tough. You were invited.
You refused.
You refused. That is, so what? And the same program was in place in 2012 and in 2008 as well, and Obama used it. And that wasn't the problem. In 2008, Obama used Facebook to get himself elected. And I remember a time when CNN and Time magazine were lauding the Democrat campaign for how innovative they were, and they were using the new digital world they saw. Okay, and then the Republicans caught up to the game and used it as well. It's not Trump's fault that Hillary's campaign was dumb. I mean, it really isn't.
Yeah, but you're talking about people who actively deny reality. As it is okay when they use it, but it's not okay when somebody else uses it.
Yeah,
particularly when they are their opponents.
Yeah, and that's really funny, and that's why I'm framing this in the term of a longer trend. The Democratic Party has been degrading lately as an organization because their operatives used to be very smart. They're not anymore, and that's shocking. All the fun is moving on the right, really. I think I have it on my list. I'll have to make a video say why all the fun is now on the right, because it is. I mean, there's nothing fun in being a leftist these days. At least in Europe there is the far left, which they are still having fun. But in the US, their far left is even more bananas. I mean, AOC, come on, really. And their mainstream left is just absolutely no fun. It's the anti-fun league. It really is. There's nothing fun in the Democrat side. Speaking of Silicon Valley, Business Insider, Silicon Valley's workforce is feeling more burned out than before the pandemic, with nearly 70% reporting work from home exhaustion. I'm going to love commenting this. As the coronavirus crisis stretches into the fall, Silicon Valley's workforce is more burned out than ever before. That's according to a new survey from anonymous workplace chat app Blind, which surveyed 3,023 employees at companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Gulag, and Facebook. Blind's poll found that employees at some of the world's biggest tech companies are feeling more burned out than they did prior to the pandemic. Of the total employees surveyed, 68% say they feel more burned out than when they worked at an office. Burnout is particularly high amongst employees at Google and Facebook. 79% of Google employees and 81% of Facebook employees say they are more burned out. Blind's findings highlight that employee burnout is getting worse, not better, as the coronavirus pandemic stretches into the fall. A study of 3,921 users conducted on Blind in February found that 61% of professionals were burned out for reasons most often related to an unmanageable workload, insufficient rewards, and the lack of control of their work. By May, that number had risen by 12 percentage points, with 1 in 5 citing fears over job security as the main factor in how they were feeling. Other surveys have produced similar findings. Online job platform Monster found that between May and July of this year, there was a 20% increase in workers reporting symptoms of burnout, according to CNBC. Working remotely since March has alleviated stressors like grind of a long daily commute, particularly in Silicon Valley, where people with commute times of 90 minutes or more grew in some areas as much as 126% between 2009 and 2017, according to a recent study by Apartment List. But those types of daily stressors have been replaced by the existential threat of the coronavirus and secondary factors like job security and financial security, according to Terry Patterson, a psychologist and principal at global risk consulting firm Control Risks. Counterintuitively, for some, working from home carries stressors that many people didn't anticipate, Patterson told Business Insider. Remote work can make it hard for people to turn off the office. They're finding it hard to have that uninterrupted time for themselves. It's that lack of delineation between home and work that is in part continuing to cause burnout amongst workers even after 7 months of working from home. In another recent Blind survey of 5,500 users about work-life balance, more than half of respondents said that their work-life balance has worsened since working from home. There used to be some delineation between work and home life. Now it's gone, one Google employee wrote on Blind. Not working from home, just living at work. Beyond work-life balance, there are issues that arise for workers from just the daily toll of doing their jobs. Employees are still reporting Zoom fatigue in droves. John Burke, Chief People Officer at DocuSign, described the video calls as exhausting in a recent interview with the New York Times, a former newspaper. By 7 o'clock last night, I was zoomed out, she said. And working from home continues to lead to longer hours, tech workers say. The Blind poll of 3,023 tech workers found that 60% are working more hours than they were prior to the pandemic, particularly at Amazon and Microsoft, where 67 and 70% of employees respectively say they're working longer hours than before. Half of Gulag and Facebook employees reported the same. All of the issues that we've heard about really paint this broader picture of a more vulnerable population and more stressed population in our workforce than we had going into this pandemic, Patterson said. We really find that is catching up to employees. Wah. Wah. Now, they raise legitimate points. That whole thing with working, with living at work and things like that. I speak from the perspective of someone who works about 2/3 of the time from home since 2012. So I have a much longer experience in this, and that's true to an extent. Unless if you're strong enough mentally, you can draw the boundaries yourself, and if you do that, you'll be fine. But I can't expect soy boys from Silicon Valley to do that because so that's one aspect. Second aspect: if I were a dictator, I would impose this regime forever for all Silicon Valley workers, and also I would double their taxes. They don't pay their fair share. No, they have to pay more. What? They pay 60% now? 90 at the very least.
The tech tax.
Yes. And it should be on workers first, then on CEOs. As my friend Milo Yiannopoulos said about 5 years ago when he wrote an article called The Regressive Tax, in which you get taxed less if you make more, and you get taxed harsher, because that would incentivize people to make more. Rather than stay in the lower brackets. Now, jokes aside, these people supported the model of working from home. So you don't get to complain. I don't care how much you suffer. I'm glad you do. I hope you suffer more. And again, if I were a dictator, I would impose this model forever for them. For them as people, I don't care. You move to another company, you're obligated to work from home. Forever. Is that too harsh?
Oh, in the case of the Silicon Valley workers, not at all. But they do raise a legitimate point about working from home, because even I started working from home when I started this new job, and it's a corporate job because they're the ones who answer first. And in the circumstance I'm personally in right now, they don't have exactly the luxury of choosing. And it is indeed difficult to working from home when you're actually both living and working in the same space. I live in an apartment. I don't have like some people in the UK that I've seen that manage to build shacks in the back of their gardens that are definitely the office space. But yeah, it is pretty taxing that you're working from the same place that you also sleep. There's no delimitation that used to be in the past before this entire SARS-CoV to stupidity. That when you get to the office, you know that it's time for work. You're set mentally to work when you get to that place, and when you get home, it's a place to relax, a place to sleep, it's a place to eat. And as these people have said, it is actually polarizing when you're working in these conditions. And on the topic of them working more when they work from home, well, that's because they're bored. Because I've seen this trend. I followed it on LinkedIn because that's where particularly big tech is there. Not just recruits, but they also spend time on it.
Yeah, it's their social media in a way.
Yeah, and people work more because simply they're bored. And during the lockdown, our friends said that during that 2-month lockdown that happened in Romania, most of the people would log in on weekends to work just because they were bored. They didn't know what else to do, and they had a fair point. A lot of people were dumb enough not to be able to complete that sheet of paper correctly in order to get out and get some sunlight. But still,
yeah, what I find particularly insulting, really. That's what I was looking at while you were talking, and I still can't find it. There is that chapter where I say, oh, but beyond their concerns for the existential threat of the virus, fuck off. Fuck off. The average age amongst Silicon Valley is like 33-ish. Okay?
And they're the least susceptible to any serious...
And with their push to bring in as many women as possible, that lowers the risk of death even more. Okay, because women are less affected by the SARS-CoV-2 than men are. Like 2/3 of the people dying are men. Okay, so no, there is no existential threat. Stop lying to yourselves first and foremost, because I'm sure they do believe it.
Oh yeah,
it's just that they're wrong.
Yeah, no doubt that they believe it. Well, they are definitely wrong. But this is why we have no sympathy for these people. They've done it themselves in great part.
Yeah, and many of them have asked it, have begged for it. You know, they would have accused their own companies of being, what would be insensitive to their work, to the needs of the workers.
Yes.
If the companies would have said, you know what, no, you're still coming to an office. Okay, fine, we're going to arrange some distance, but you're coming to the office. If Zuckerberg would have said that, and I'm sure he would have said that because, you know, his wife is Chinese, so basically has full information from the CCP much more often than people would dare to admit, including Zuckerberg to himself. But if he had said that, then he would have found himself against a strike, basically. You know, the workers would have complained about it. As for, you know, they're being bored, they're bored and that's why they work more. Yeah, again, that's their fault. It's not the fault of the company. It's not the fault of capitalism. It's not the fault of the pandemic. Yeah. It's your fault.
The same way as it's their fault, like you said just a while ago. They were the ones who accused the companies of being insensitive, that they got called to the office rather than work from home. And they realized once, even in my company, because the company I work for is technically an American company from Florida, they still same rules apply for us as they do for them. And realistically, in the current scenario, we're going to spend at least the next 9 months realistically working from home. And these people have already spent, or I'm a new hire, these people have already spent 6 to 7 months working from home. And the situation, as we've seen, is not going to get any better because cold season is up in the northern hemisphere. And as we've seen back in January and February this year, the virus is the most active when cold weather's out.
Yeah, because it's a cough. You know, it's the coughing season. And the cold season is the coughing season. It has been the coughing season for the previous 5,000 years at the very least, and will continue to be the coughing season for at least the next 5,000 years or 6,000. How much longer there is until there's going to be a solar flare that's going to wipe everything else? Something like 6,000 years from now, something like that. So, you know, it's the coughing season. Yeah, cough. Tough. You don't want to cough? Fine, then work more. And for those who accuse boredom, again, it's your fault. You know, there is such thing called books. There is such thing called parks. There is such thing called friends. Oh, right, you don't have any friends because you're all a bunch of fucking autistics. And you have failed to build your own tribe. Well, I'm sorry. Well, actually, I'm not sorry. For Silicon Valley workers, I'm not sorry at all. I hope you suffer more. Reuters, Venezuela prosecutor arrests opposition coordinator. See, if you go a little bit further south from the US, there are more pressing concerns. Venezuela's top prosecutor said on Tuesday opposition activist Roland Carreno had been arrested hours after opposition leader Juan Guaido denounced what he called the forced disappearance of the Popular Will Party's coordinator. Chief Prosecutor Tarek Saab wrote on Twitter that Carreno had been detained for alleged participation in conspirative plans against the democratic peace. I've heard that before. And his office had assigned the prosecutor to the case. Carreno was approached on Monday afternoon by unidentified people in vehicles without license plates, Popular Will said on Twitter. The party had been unable to confirm his location after that encounter. He remains disappeared, Guaido, head of the opposition-controlled legislature, wrote in a separate post on Twitter. We alert the world about his forced disappearance and we hold the dictatorship responsible for his physical and mental integrity. Rights groups said the government of President Nicolas Maduro frequently arrests opposition adversaries, often without due process, and in some cases leaves them in incomunicado for hours or days. Venezuela's communication minister Freddy Nanes said he rejected the campaign to discredit Venezuela's rule of law in connection with the arrest. In Venezuela, guarantees, due process and the right to defense are respected without exception, Nanes wrote on Twitter.
Yeah, sure, they are in a dictatorship completely. Exactly the same way as the Soviet Union respected the freedom of speech from their constitution.
Yes.
You had the right to free speech, but you didn't
have many rights after you spoke.
You didn't have the right, exactly. After you spoke, you weren't free of the consequences that followed.
Right. There is that joke that Ronald Reagan presented it in English for the first time in English. It was basically about Russian and American were discussing, and the American says, in the United States there is such thing called the absolute freedom of speech, the First Amendment. I can go to the White House, to the Oval Office, and pound into the desk and say, Mr. Reagan, I don't like how you're running this country. And the Soviet citizens said, I can do that too. You do? Yes, of course. I can go to the Kremlin, ask to see Gorbachev, go to Gorbachev, pound the desk and say, Mr. Gorbachev, I don't like how Mr. Reagan is running his country. That's basically how but the reason I laughed while I was reading is that the allegation is participation in conspirative plans against the democratic peace.
That sounds familiar.
That sounds very familiar. If you remember, at some point I published a piece, a video on this channel 5 years ago, I think. It was at the beginnings of this channel, where hundreds and hundreds of Romanian children were kept in a gulag in Tăcșor in the 50s, early 50s, 1949, 1950, and 1951, and 52 a little bit. Most of them under the allegation of conspiracy against the socialist order. That's what it is. Now they call it the democratic peace. Same bullshit. Same bullshit. Right. So probably Mr. Carreno will suffer some beatings, and then some more beatings, probably scientific beatings, Soviet style, on the swindle, and then they'll probably release him. They can't afford to kill him because that's a little bit too complicated, especially if Trump is re-elected. Nobody wants that. But yeah, they'll probably beat him a little bit, and maybe do some show trial, maybe not, probably not, and that's pretty much it. Again, unfortunately for Mr. Guaido, he doesn't have a decent political operative who's expert in undermining these kinds of regimes. He had the best opportunity last year to take down the regime, and he didn't. And he didn't because of the kind of stupidity that we almost lost our revolution in 1989 for the exact same reason. Luckily, that piece of stupidity hit a little bit too late into the process and became unstoppable. Namely, this instinct of, but let's not do violence. That's what's killing opposition movements against these kinds of regimes. No, these kinds of regimes, you take them down via violence.
Yep.
There is no such thing. But maybe we can have a peaceful transit. No,
you do not negotiate.
You can peacefully put them into the under the guillotine, yes, or peacefully into the what's it called, the where you hang them. Yeah, sure, that can be done peacefully. It becomes very peacefully after you hang them. But
when the corpse stops moving.
yes. Or you can, peacefully shoot them. But there is no such thing as a peaceful transition to power from that kind of regime.
No. Yeah. That's what they don't understand, unfortunately.
Again, we were close to losing our revolution for the exact same reason. At some point, people were like, okay, there's been enough of violence. Can we do this without violence? Luckily, that shout, without violence, came in a little bit too late into the process. It was impossible to stop the fall of the regime by that time. But if that shout had come 3 days earlier, probably we would now we would have Ceausescu's son ruling or something like that.
God help us.
God help us, yeah. Is it the same thing with Mr. Guaido? He had the chance last year when he had full streets of protests, everyone was ready, and there were enough people ready to do what was necessary, and he started doing diplomacy. Terrible. And now, under the excuse of the cough, the regime can start shoot you all. Good luck.
The 9mm vaccine.
The 9mm vaccine, yeah. But maybe they're vaccinated with Sputnik 5 since he's a friend of Putin, isn't he? So yeah. That's why when you have in the same situation, I'll be talking after the break about Belarus, same situation. If you have the opportunity to take down these people physically, you have to take them down physically. Did they ever show mercy to you? No, then why the hell are you? Okay? It's really that simple. Fine, you don't want to kill them. There is such thing as islands. Exile them there. Something. But you have to physically remove them from office. There is no such thing as, but we're going to take the power because we won the diplomacy and the argument. No! You have to physically remove them and replace them with your people. That's how you take power. And in democracies or semi-democracies, we have that thing called the ballot box, where we physically remove people we don't like and put people that we do like. But in dictatorship, that's not an option. And as a result, you have to physically remove them by other means. The reason we like the ballot box is because we don't have to shoot people that often. that's the only reason. But it's still based on the underlying assumption that if you don't physically remove people from power, they will stay in power. It's really,
at all costs.
At all costs, yes. It's really that simple. Alrighty, let's take a break. We'll be listening to a song from the band called Crimena from Craiova, Romania. The song is called Declaration of War. It's from their latest album. And I don't know, I'm gonna put some footage from some post-apocalyptic socialistic place like Braila, for instance. No, seriously, it's some the derelict, I think it would be the word in English, or semi-destroyed former factory, former socialist era factory. Those of you who watched the Romanian language podcast might have seen some of these, some of that footage, but I'll try not to repeat that one, so it'll be always something new. So yeah, Crimena, Declaration of War, and then we'll be back. Alrighty, we're back. I hope you enjoyed the desolated landscape.
The socialist wasteland.
The socialist wasteland, the nostalgics for communism, they will say that that was a place where things were made, man. In reality, what they were doing there can be done now with a fraction of that field. In any event, British Brainwash Corporation, Belarus protests, national opposition strike gains momentum. Not really. Workers at some state-run plants downed the tools and chanted slogans outside the gates. Hundreds of students also marched out of several universities in Minsk, clapping, chanting, and linking arms. Do they only get SARS-CoV-2 there? However, the government says key enterprises are still running smoothly. President Alexander Lukashenko ignored the opposition's midnight deadline for him to step down. Protests have gripped Belarus since he claimed victory in an August poll widely viewed as rigged. The Interior Ministry says police arrested 523 people during mass anti-government demonstrations on Sunday, 352 of whom are still in custody. On Monday, at least 155 people were arrested for supporting the strike action in Minsk, Borisov, Brest, Grodno, Mogilev, and Novopolotsk. Human rights group Vesna says the full scale of the protests on Monday is not yet clear, partly because of the authorities' media restrictions. Videos posted to independent media site tut.by show empty factories and students walking out of their universities. A source in Minsk following the protests told the BBC that the strike was affecting some major state enterprises, including the Grodno Azot chemical plant in Minsk tractor plant, but they had not been brought to a standstill. Dozens of shops, cafes, and restaurants are closed in Belarus in solidarity with the strike. Many other small businesses are also supporting the strike, our source says. But big supermarkets and public transport are still running normally. Thousands of pensioners walked through central Minsk, eventually merging with a procession of students. Pensioners have held protest rallies every Monday. Students have also been very active despite threats of expulsion. Earlier, an estimated 100,000 demonstrators marched for the 11th successive Sunday of protests. Many waved the opposition's red-white flags and chanted the strike as they marched. According to Russian news agencies citing their correspondents at the scene, at least 10 stun grenades went off. There were also reports that riot police had fired rubber bullets. Security forces also blocked the roads in central Minsk and water cannons were put in place. Mr. Tikhanovskaya issued her ultimatum on October the 13th. We talked about that last episode. She said that from Lithuania, but people have had enough, blah, 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 blah. Earlier, anti-Lukashenko protests at state enterprises in support of the opposition were not sustained. There are reports of workers being warned that they will lose their jobs if they go on strike. The BBC's source in Minsk says fear is widespread after many protesters were beaten up and tortured by the militia. It is common for masked men with batons to grab protesters, drag them into unmarked vans, and drive off. So, whilst the title from the BBC is said, but what was the title again? Because I want to be very precise. The national opposition strike gains momentum. I'm sorry, that's just not true. I'm sure the BBC would wish it to be true. Quite frankly, I wish it were true. But it's not. It's not working. And it's exactly what I was warning about last episode when I said that, look, you'd better be prepared, Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, that if you threaten this, better be prepared to deliver. Because if you fail, then the whole thing fizzles out. And as far as I'm seeing, and again, I'm sorry I cannot show you the footage, because if I do, then that means I would burn some of my sources, and some of my sources, they just happen to work for certain institutions in Belarus. And of course, nothing would happen to me if I were to show you the footage, but it would happen quite a lot to them, and I would lose my source, and I would harm people that are my friends. So, no. But from the footage that I've been able to see, both the Sunday and the Monday and the whole recent period, really, since the last episode, they didn't look much different from the previous round of protests. So that means the whole mass strike thing isn't working. And if you can't put down the big plants, if you can't put down Grodno Azot, that would be the equivalent of Tractor in '87. In 1987, the communist regime in Romania trembled quite a bit because the workers of such plant, very similar to Grodno Azot, decided, fuck it. And not just fuck it, but they were like, fuck communism. And it took a lot of repression to stop them, but eventually, they stopped them then, but just 18 months or 19 months later, they were unstoppable. 18 months may seem like a lot of time, but at the scale of history, that's just like next day. Okay, as a result, if you cannot stop things like Gradno Azot, if you cannot stop public transport, that means you can't bring the country to a standstill. That means you don't have the broad support that you claim you do. Now, of course, there is the excuse, but fear runs amok and what? Yeah, sure. Yeah, fear ran amok in 1989 here too. Yeah, sure. But if you cannot convince people to defeat their own fear, then that means they don't see the Lukashenko regime as much more threatening to themselves than whatever you're proposing. And
in this circumstance, the only thing that they have left is for the current opposition on the streets to amp up the resistance, become even more radicalized, at least 3 times more radicalized than they are now, make things so ridiculous and so unacceptable that the government has to do something about it. And even though those answers may be drastic, no doubt about it, that's the price to pay for liberty in the end.
Freedom isn't free.
Yep.
It isn't. It never has been and never will be. Now, I've seen some, even on the official channels, some threats that they will use live ammunition against the populace.
We talked about that last week. About the threat that they will use.
And I said last week that I doubt that's going to happen. It hasn't happened. You see, that's why you listen to the sofa. We've been through this before. And if Lukashenko threatens, then that means he's not willing to do it. Ceausescu didn't threaten; he just used it. Okay. And I've seen some panic on social media. They're firing at the population. I'm like, can I see the video? Oh no, sorry, that's not live ammunition. It's just not. So they didn't. Which means, if I were part of the more subversive arm of the opposition in Belarus, the first thing I would do is try to get as many police officers and security officers and militiamen, turn them against their own apparatus. Because if they're not willing to fire at the civilians, that means they're very subvertible. I mean, heck, we did the subversion thing even as they were firing at the civilians, right? But if they're not even willing to do that, then that means their loyalty to the government is even more frail than it was in December the 20th, 1989.
Yeah, and in the case of Romania, it wasn't the police officers or the gendarmerie firing; it was the military.
The military, yes.
It was the military that was firing. So far as I've seen, Lukashenko didn't threaten to do the also Soviet measure of sending out the tanks.
They didn't really send the tanks. They just sent water cannons and riot police, and there is some militarized police, sure, but they didn't really send the military yet. Maybe that will be the case. Now, if I were to coordinate the radicals from there, I would suggest that this would be a right time to pull a Tiananmen on them. That is to say, provoke the government to threaten or to head over with the tank towards one of your activists. They won't run over you. They won't. But you have to provoke that standoff. Tiananmen style.
Which is why it's important for the ones who are already out in the streets to radicalize them even more than they are now. Because the first option, which Tsikhanouskaya said, of gaining the widespread support didn't work. That much is clear. So then you got option number 2, and the option which is not exactly an option.
10% radicals.
Yeah, pretty much that, along with subverting the military, subverting the police.
Yeah, but you need the 10% radicals. They probably has like 4% radicals right now, which is not bad. If you have a very wide support in the country, then 4% radicals can be enough. But if you have the wide support, but if those people aren't willing to stop building tractors for your cause, then that means you don't have the generalized wide support of the country. Sure, a lot of significant portions of the country showed up at the protests at least once, that's true, but apparently it's not big enough, because again, if it were big enough, we would have seen a sudden plunge in anything in Belarus for political reasons, and that would have drawn Lukashenko's attention, whether he liked it or not. But it's just not the case. And if it's not the case, then you need to work more. That's why I'm and again, the window of opportunity is closing at this point. You have to move fast, because and that's what I was warning about last week. I say, if you use this and you fail, that's gonna be quite a problem, because you need another 16 to 18 months to prepare another momentum like this, unless you radicalize faster. And this, at the end of this week, you put up a very radical standoff with the authorities. If you do that, then that's probably gonna work.
Yep.
Yeah, I know that's terrible. I'm asking people to become radicalized, but you want to get rid of Lukashenko, that's how you do it. Or maybe you don't want to get rid of Lukashenko. In which case,
so just in the case, it's not exactly the same case as Venezuela, but there are still common threads to be seen. When you're doing a comparison, same thing there as it is the same thing here in the case of Belarus. You gotta amp it up.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're already 11 weeks into it. How long do you think that people will still be capable of going out? As we talked last week, you're gonna lose momentum because people will get tired of protesting constantly.
Yeah, as Sololinsky teaches us, that a tactic that drags on too long, it drags. It's a drag. You just have to helicopter it. It's part of the Rules for Radicals handbook, which, by the way, I hope everyone organizing in Belarus has read it twice and understood it. If not, that's terrible. And yeah, as for the comparison with Venezuela, I guess the great disadvantage of the protesters in Belarus is precisely this. People aren't starving to death. Belarus is a poor country, but it's not Venezuela. There is no hyperinflation. Things are not that bad from a material standpoint. But you're heading towards a situation where, if you try diplomacy, that's terrible. Admittedly, they haven't tried diplomacy so far, which is good. You should never try diplomacy. You don't negotiate with Lukashenko, because he doesn't understand that language.
Oh, I'm pretty sure, being basically Western Russians, they're supposed to know that you don't do diplomacy with the Slavs.
And especially not with a Soviet dictator.
Particularly that.
Okay, you don't do diplomacy, but at the same time, you threatened with the strike. You pulled off your national strike, which is kind of national, but it's not a generalized strike. It ain't looking good for the opposition. I'm just saying. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. It's sure. Last week you were comparing it with 1989. I'm saying, hold on your horses. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Now it looks more like 1987 at best. Sorry. So yeah, get yourself more radicalized if you want to win. If not, then you're probably gonna win 2 or 3 years from now, when Lukashenko will be old enough and will stop caring, maybe. Or maybe Putin gives him a great deal for the exile. I don't know. Berlingske Tidene. The results of the Danish face-covering study will appear as soon as a journal is brave enough to publish it. For weeks, the researchers and the media and thousands of curious Danes have been waiting for it. The publication of the results from the large Danish research study on the effect of the masks, or perhaps the lack thereof. But we must probably arm ourselves with additional patience. At least 3 of the world's leading medical journals, The Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, and the American Medical Association journal JAMA, have rejected the study, Berlingske has learned. Why the journals have rejected the study, the researchers behind it will not say. And they will not reveal the conclusions of the study either. But on Sunday, one of the researchers behind the study may have approached an answer as to why it has not been published yet. Former New York Times and former newspaper journalist Alex Berenson asked Professor Thomas Lars Benfield at Vidover Hospital's Infection Diseases Department about when the results will be published. As soon as a journal is brave enough to accept the study, was Benfield's response. To Berlingske, Thomas Benfield says that the quote that Benson has shared on Twitter has been taken a bit out of context. One of the researchers behind the eagerly awaited study, Christian Turp Pedersen, says that he had probably figured out an answer in the style of Benfield to the journalist's questions. Asked directly if it is because the result in some people's eyes can be perceived as controversial, the answer is, that's how I interpret it too. That's how I want to interpret it. Exactly what the controversy consists of, he does not want to elaborate. The Danish research study is the largest study to date of whether the use of muzzles in public spaces protects us against the Wuhan cough, worldwide, mind you. During the study, which started in April, half of the 6,000 participating subjects wore sanitary masks for a month, while the other half did not. The distribution was decided by drawing lots. At the end of the trial period, all 6,000 were tested for the Wuhan cough. Researchers from 4 hospitals in the metropolitan area are behind the study, which has received financial support from 2 foundations behind the Salling Group. The researchers behind the study have known the results for several months, and according to the study's spokesman and lead author, professor of cardiology and chief physician at Rikshospitalet Henning Bundgaard, it is urgent with the publication, partly because it will better equip the authorities to make decisions about the use of such measures. Nevertheless, the Danish researchers refuse to publish their results outside of a medical journal. Science is not final, and the results are not final until other experts around the world have looked at the same data that we have and come to the same conclusions. It is only concluded when the independent assessment is completed, says Henning Bundgaard, said previously to Berlingske Tidende. So let's go on a limb and say it probably says muzzles are bullshit.
Well, yeah, that's when I read that article first time in Danish, I thought I'm pretty sure what they found out was that they don't work, which is why it's that severe opposition from all the medical journals. And the rationale behind it is that quite a lot of countries on this planet have invested a lot of money into buying masks and into forcing masks to be used both in closed spaces and in some countries in open spaces, in Romania as well, in Belgium as well.
Well, actually, in Romania, it's only a few cities, and they don't have the legal force for it. So, I mean, it's not fair. In Belgium, they have the legal force for it. So do they in Spain, but not here. Now, let me put it this way. When I say they don't work, what I mean by that is what basically Anders Tegnell has been saying for the last 7 months, and he's right. Namely that, first of all, most people will not be using a very appropriate type of face covering for this kind of cough, for this kind of virus. So most people will be using an improper one anyway. Secondly, if you make it a generalized thing, that will be most people or all people wear some sort of face covering, that may alleviate some of the burden, the psychological burden on certain panic cards. But for most of the rest of the population, panic cards are just basically 1% of the population at most, and that's me being generous, because most of the rest of people know that it's just a cough. They know instinctively at this point. But for most of the rest of the people, it will be, okay, fine, you force me to wear this, then fuck your distance, fuck your hygiene, fuck everything, because you said it protects me. So as a result, you see fewer people giving a damn, and that means a lot more people catching it. Which, of course, in general is not a big issue because it's just a cough. But if your point is to slow the spread, then mandating muzzles is the wrong way to go. And this is what Anders Tegnell has been saying, at least since April, if not from March, but at least since April. And as a result, I'm pretty sure that that's part of what they discovered. Namely that the portion of the group that wore the muzzles kept their distance a lot less, they did care about a lot less, and as a result they caught it. Not to mention that most people tend to touch it often and whatnot, which also makes things worse, not better. If the purpose is to slow the spread of the Wuhan flu. If the purpose is to just make some panic hearts feel better, then I guess it doesn't matter the results of this study. But if the purpose is indeed to slow it, I don't think it works.
But you know what opposition I've recently seen, particularly now, because Sweden is brought up even more and more.
Of course.
As the second wave is across happening in Europe.
Well, people look at the graphs.
Yeah, is that? But you cannot compare Sweden with other countries like Belgium, because the population concentration is not as high as it is in Sweden.
I'm sorry, Stockholm is crowded than Brussels, more crowded than Brussels, and I say this as someone who's been to both of the cities multiple times. Stockholm is crowded, more crowded than Brussels. Stockholm is comparable to London. The Stockholm subway metro, the tunnelbana in Stockholm is comparable to the tube, easily. In fact, I think tunnelbana in Stockholm is a little bit bigger surface-wise, maybe. Anyway, but as a crowded place. And again, there is no such thing as muzzles in the tunnelbana in Stockholm. There is no such thing as, they advise you to keep distance, but nobody does, because it's impossible. I mean, I'd like to see anyone trying to keep distance at T-Centralen in Stockholm at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. in the middle of the week. It's just not possible. But if a crowded train comes in, you just wait for the next one. Yeah, you're gonna wait for an entire hour, at best, if you want to avoid a very crowded train. But by 10 a.m. it becomes a little bit more breathable. For people like me who tend to wake up at 10 a.m. Or even later than that, then that's okay. But for people who are on a schedule, no, it's just not possible.
Yeah, but getting back to the masks, everybody needs to understand, particularly those doing the decisions of forcing the masks on people, is that they don't work. None of the masks, it doesn't matter if they're the surgical mask or if you actually manage to get the legitimate 3M N95s, they're not designed to protect you against viral infections. None of them are.
Yeah, I guess if you can force N95s on everyone, maybe that could slow, not protect anyone, but slow the spread. But that would still be, that would still mean that you somehow managed to, not just to convince, but to teach enough people, at least 70%, if not more, to wear them correctly, because that's a separate issue also. Wearing an N95 is a complicated business.
Yep.
And
I know, because I've worn one.
Yes. It's a very complicated business.
Yeah, and not to mention that if even one large country, let's say in this case of Belgium, there are 10 million people in a quite small surface area. If they were to impose N95s on everybody, there is no factory on this planet that could supply a country like that, because you're not going to use one mask a day. That mask needs to be changed every 2 hours, and
I think the N95 can be worn a little bit more than that, but you still need at least 2 per day at the minimum, right?
Exactly, but there's no manufacturing capability, because most of the N95s are made in the US, and there's also this other thing. We've discovered in Romania that a lot of the masks that were bought from China via Unifarm.
Oh yeah.
You've seen that. You see that Ministry of Defense study that they're half as capable. Compared to standard, they're supposed to be over 95% against bacterial infections, and they discovered it's somewhere between
35 and 55.
35 and 55.
Yes. And again, that's not specific to Romania. I'm pretty sure that is the case to most of Europe.
Because everybody bought from pretty much the same suppliers.
Yes. I remember there were a few scandals in France and in the Netherlands where they had returned entire shiploads of muzzles back to China because they weren't even remotely close to what the standard should have been.
Yeah, not to mention that they're not even sterile. It says on the fucking packaging.
Yeah,
you've seen the packaging. I've seen the packaging. It says these are not sterile.
Read the box, Karen. Read the box.
Well, yeah, you're telling that the same people who don't read the box is the same people who don't read the terms and conditions at least once in a while.
Yeah, read the box, Karen. And I'm pretty sure the Mr. Bungord's study contains some of those concerns, maybe in the appendix or something like that. And I'm pretty sure that's part of the reason. Now, another part of the reason is that most of these medical journals are
politicized.
Politicized is to put it mildly.
Yeah.
They're straight up political operatives. Especially the Lancet. I mean, the Lancet is a shameful publication. If I were to be in the position to publish a study, I would personally be against the very idea of the Lancet getting anywhere near my study. The Lancet is the same place that told us vaccines cause autism. The Lancet is the same place that says hydroxychloroquine kills people by the boatloads. And it took them about 2 months to, oh my God, oh no, that was wrong, and then they had to retract it. And at the peak of the panic, when the asshole in me was saying, guys, I don't care how many scientific studies you bring to me. I've been to Africa where people take hydroxychloroquine like candy. 2 or 3 per day, every day for decades. I haven't seen any piles of bodies. If hydroxychloroquine is so fucking dangerous.
Well, in Africa you see piles of bodies, but for a completely other reason, definitely not.
In war-torn countries, but in countries that don't have war, no, you don't see the piles of bodies. It's just not the case. And that's why I said, I don't care how many scientific studies you bring to me, I will not believe you.
Yeah, it will definitely be useful to make these people understand to actually publish their study in public, not in a journal. They most likely don't know how politicized this entire situation is.
Admittedly, the argument that he's bringing is that, look, we just want experts around the world to look at the same data. Maybe we missed some of the conclusions and whatnot. Yeah, so he basically wants the peer review rather than the...
Indeed.
Which is fair.
Indeed.
Which is fair. But you can do that, using mailing lists. Because experts, especially experts in infectious diseases, now they're in Telegram groups. I'm in one of them. God damn it! That's how I get most of my news, and that's why my newsletters for the internal members of the Freedom Alternative Network are so bloody good when it comes to these things. Because that's where I get my intelligence. So I'm pretty sure Mr. Bungord can find one of those groups as well. If not, I can teach him how to get there. So you can get your peer review in real time. Without having to go through these politicized outlets who are basically shilling for whoever pays more, really. I mean, it's not... and if you haven't figured it out by now, then you're probably never going to figure it out. There is no such thing as authoritative science. There is such thing as authoritative scientific method, yes, of course. But there is no such... Oh, the science says... No, I don't care. No, it's someone paid for by someone else says so. Which in this case, it's usually Bill Gates, or the Wuhan Honk organization, which is also Bill Gates. Or some people who have an impeccable track record of being wrong, which is the case of the Lancet, right? So, so I'm pretty sure that's at least some of these concerns that we've just expressed are included in the study. And that's probably why the... because, when he says that, this will help authorities make decisions about the use of such measures. I'm pretty sure it's something along the way of, if it's in the middle of an outbreak in the hospital, maybe there is some use for them, but for the metro or for the tram or for the taxi, it's probably no use for them. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it is definitely very shameful the way the Lancet has turned, considering their historical records. Let's remember, the Lancet began when one of the first people of medicine from the UK, Edward Jenner, found a version of the smallpox vaccine by inoculating people with the smallpox, the
cowpox.
With the cowpox, and that's how the Lancet started.
Yes.
So from that, to get to what it is now and what it has been for quite a while, since pretty much
98.
Yeah, pretty much since that vaccines cause autism study.
Yeah, 1998. So it's been more than 20 years since the Lancet has been basically the equivalent of toilet paper. Used up toilet paper, to be more precise, because toilet paper is useful. Used up toilet paper, not so much. Maybe in Venezuela. But no, seriously. I want to see that study, and sure, I'll arm myself with more patience. I'm accustomed from the previous pandemic. Back in 2009, at the previous pandemic, I was also under the negation and denier camp. At that time, I was arguing from the same position, just a cough bro. At that time, I went intentionally and contracted that particular cough in a hospital just to prove a scientist wrong, and I did. When he saw me, and at the time I was a lot younger, of course, and I was at the peak of the most at-risk group from that particular cough, and I had nothing, absolutely nothing. And I was arguing from the same position. Basically, if you're a healthy person with decent immune system, it's not even a cough, it's nothing. And of course, he was arguing against me using studies from the Wuhan Hong organization. And I was like, I don't care how many studies you have. I know I'm right, and let me prove it. And I did. This time, the same thing. I don't care how many studies you bring. You guys are wrong. And the Danish study, I want to see it. And I'm pretty sure it says what I say and what you say it does.
Yep.
Yeah. Damn Scandinavians, man, ruining the Bill Gates pandemic narrative and shit. Swedes without muscles, the Danes making a study saying that, look, your muscles are bullshit. Kinda terrible. Alrighty. Moving a little bit further to the south from Denmark, British brainwash corporation France targets radical Islam amid row with Turkey. The mosque in Pantin, northeastern Paris, was among the first signs that something this time was different. The building, shaped like an aircraft hangar with tiny windows, perched high up in its corrugated, I don't know what corrugated means, corrugated walls, stands empty and closed. Outside is an official notice taped in plastic against the rain, announcing its forced closure by the government for involvement in the Islamist movement and for sharing a social media video targeting teacher Samuel Paty. The French government's general crackdown on radical Islamism in response to the beheading of the history teacher outside Paris this month has been rapid and tough. A blizzard of inquiries, closures, plans and proposals that have sometimes been hard to keep track of. Fear will change sides, President Emmanuel Macron is widely quoted as telling his defense council last week. The government has announced more than 120 searches of individual homes, the dissolution of associations accused of spreading Islamist rhetoric, plans to target terrorist funding, new support for teachers, and fresh pressure on social media companies to police content more efficiently. Nothing on this scale happened after other attacks on President Macron's watch. Despite the violent murder of some 20 people during his tenure, among them police officers, a young woman at a train station, and shoppers in a Christmas market. So what's different now? Jérôme Fourquet is a political analyst and the director of the IFOP polling agency. He believes that this attack was different both in targeting a teacher and in its brutality, and that there's been a shift in the gear within the government. We're no longer dealing with organized jihadist networks, he said, but a terrorist who came from our own country, an isolated individual who was radicalized. The government believes the response can not only be about law enforcement, they also need to manage social networks and associations, because the tragic case shed light on a whole network which spreads hate speeches within the population. The system needs changing. He said an IFOP survey 2 years ago suggested that a third of teachers had self-censored to avoid conflicts over secularism. He believes the government is right to challenge what he says are ideological threats to the republic's laws alongside security threats. But Laurent Mukinelli, a sociologist at France's National Center for Scientific Research, says President Macron and his government have overreacted for political reasons, specifically the presidential election in 2022. Macron is adding fuel to the fire, Mr. Mukinelli said. He doesn't want to appear on the back foot compared to the right and the far right. His main goal is to get re-elected in 2022, so he needs to occupy the ground of the far right. And their themes since the end of the 19th century have been immigration and security. A poll last week suggested that the far-right leader Marine Le Pen is France's most trusted political leader in the fight against terrorism. Mr. Macron trails her by 4 points. The two leaders could well find themselves facing each other in a presidential runoff in 18 months' time. Security has widely been seen as the weak spot in President Macron's arbor, trailing behind his strong image abroad and forceful economic reforms at home. But Marine Le Pen has also cast the peaceful public expression of Islam as a threat to French national identity. Over his time in office, Mr. Macron has taken the great care to distinguish between security threats and secularism. For a long time, he would often sidestep questions around headscarves, burkini swimsuits, or halal school meals. But the febrile politics around religious expression in France has sometimes made subtlety feel like a luxury. In September, Anne-Christine Lang, an MP from Mr. Macron's liberal La République En Marche party, walked out of the National Assembly after being asked to listen to testimony from someone wearing a Muslim headscarf. I can't accept that inside the National Assembly, the beating heart of democracy, we will accept someone turning up in a hijab, she said. And whether or not the government's response is winning President Macron's supporters at home, it's certainly rousing his critics abroad. There have been protests in Libya, Bangladesh, the Gaza Strip, along with calls for a boycott of French products and a growing war of words with Turkey. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has backed the boycott and publicly questioned Mr. Macron's mental health after the French leader defended France's secular values last week, saying the country will never give up its cartoons. Now, update to this article is from yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago. But on October the 29th, as we're taping this, there's been 2 other terrorist attacks in France, 2 beheadings. One very early in the morning and then one later in the afternoon. Again, labeled as terrorism. And to my surprise, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey actually came back and said that they feel sorry for it, and they expressed support this time for the French government. So, it's a very dynamic situation, as usual when it comes to the diplomacy with the Ottoman Empire. Sorry, I mean the Turkish Republic. And as I'm sure the French are accustomed to it, they've been friends with the Ottoman Empire since the Ottoman Empire was still called the Ottoman Empire. Sorry, I'm done pretending in using the official terminology here, because we all know it's the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, but a slight correction, there was also a third attack at the French consulate in Jeddah.
Yes, that's true. And the consulate of Saudi Arabia in France was also stricken by a terrorist attack this Thursday in the afternoon, October the 29th, October the 30th, when you're watching, whatever. But you get the point. I don't think I've said this on the World So Far report. I said it in the Romanian podcast that the Overton window about the religion of peace is rapidly shifting. It only took Europe 5 years and a half of extremist Islam to start figuring out that a certain religion of peace is a problem. And finally the French culture has moved completely on this. The Overton window on the religion of peace has moved. Of course, not permanently. Maybe sometime in the future we'll move again backwards. Maybe, who knows? But for now, it has moved towards the far right. And I'm speaking here particularly about projecting Charlie Hebdo caricatures and then the flag of France in the public square. I think it was in the Place de la République where they did that. You're watching the footage now. So as a result, I'm like, politics is downstream from culture. Monsieur Macron, I'm sure he sees these things. And not to mention that when they pulled this stunt, which was 5 or 6 days ago, the entire political class was there. Marine Le Pen was there, Jean-Luc Mélenchon was there, the socialist mayor of Paris was there. Basically everyone was there. It's a political consensus that no, you don't get to bludgeon us into submission. Yes, we'll poke fun at your religion, however we deem fit. Tough shit if you don't like it. Which, in my opinion, is a very decent position to hold. I mean, if you don't like it, then get the hell back where you came from.
Yeah, but earlier in the article, you've seen another example of so far's witnesses. We've talked last time not only about the Overton window shifting, but also how Macron is doing this slightly opportunistically, because he knows that that Marine Le Pen has been going on this theme of being against the religion of peace, and this article is saying pretty much what we said a week ago.
Yeah, and here you go, the chief of the National Scientific Research Institute, whatever, comes in and said, yeah, Le Pen wins, man. Elections are coming up, and 18 months from now again may seem like a long period of time, but that's just tomorrow, basically. Especially when it comes to grand themes, so to use for language of French origin. When it comes to these kinds of themes, 18 months is tomorrow. And if Le Pen indeed holds a 4-point advantage on this, and is already recognized as the most trusted political leader when it comes to the religion of special needs, then that means Macron is still too diplomatic, too kind with Islam. He has to go even further than that, because he has a very, very short time frame in which he has to prove that if shit hits the fan, he will be able, and he is able, to do what is necessary for, not just for the security of the Republic, but to defend one of the most deeply held values by the French people. Whether we agree with that value or not, it doesn't matter. But for French people, laïcité is really, really bloody important. Now, in my opinion, that's not necessarily a good thing, but it is what it is. It's their country. And if you are, as a political leader, if you're not able to defend laïcité as you should, well, they're going to vote Le Pen. They might still vote Le Pen. I mean, keep this in mind. Macron might do everything in his power to quash this thing, and he might still lose. But not trying, it's Le Pen is president, basically.
Madame President.
Madame le Président. Yeah. Anything else to be said here?
Yeah, another thing covered by this article, which is also surprising, it was that aspect of the Muslims radicalized who were within the country, so they weren't outsiders this time that have done this. We've been talking about this for at least 6 years, about radicalization within second and third generation immigrants. Yeah, the Overton window shifted really hard.
Yes. And I'm sure French people watching, they know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those who haven't studied, and I think I've mentioned this like 5 years ago. I think it's a video called The Upcoming Franco-German Collapse that I made 5 years ago, where I mentioned this, but it's worth repeating. The first generation of Muslims that immigrated into France, particularly from Algeria, but also from Morocco and a few other places, not only they wanted to be French, but the societal context was of such a nature that they had to become French, whether they liked it or not. And if you look up any sociological study made on that particular group, there's almost like 100% integration rate. There's just not a problem with that group. The problems came with the not just the second but the third generation in particular. Because the third generation has no longer been brought up and is no longer growing into a climate where being French is mandatory. It just is what it is. And again, the lefties in France in the very recent past have tried to spin this as, but that's the racist past. No, it has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do. France has had non-white French since forever. It's not a racial issue. No, it's a culture issue. That Chechen guy who conducted the attack on
the beheading.
The beheading on Monsieur Paty, and the French citizens born in France that conducted the 2 terrorist attacks today. These were not immigrants; they were like second or even third generation, Muslims. They grew up in a context where being French is not mandatory. as opposed to their grandparents, who when they arrived to France, they arrived with the understanding while they were on their way en route to France, they came with the idea that they have to become French. Whereas these people, they haven't. And yeah, sure, some of them have suffered some alienation as a result of, I don't know, their parents had to work more and they were more easily drawn by gangs and whatnot. Yes, but none of that would have been possible if not for the generalized degeneration of the societal context where you no longer have to be French. It just is what it is. And every time Republicans, I mean, Les Républicains, you know, or the UMP, whatever it was called, the mainstream right, every time they brought up this point, they were called racists and Nazis and fascists for doing so, right? Because, you know, this discussion is not new. I mean, François Mitterrand was a president in late 80s when this started coming up as a discussion, as a talking point. At least at that time, you weren't called a fascist for it, but you were ignored for the most part. Over the last 10 years, you would be called a fascist and a Nazis and whatnot for bringing this up. And you know, that kind of long-range bomb, you know, with delayed explosion, well, sometimes it has to blow up. At some point, it has to blow up. And yeah, it's kind of blowing up now. Tough.
Yeah. Tough seeing the monster that you've created over the years.
Yes, and you know, and that's one of the reasons why I think even Macron is a little bit scared with this one, and for bloody good reason. Because, you know, yeah, sure, you're shutting down a mosque here and there, and okay, that's useful. I'm not going to argue against that. But there's no way in 18 months you can address the systemic problems that, well, again, not Macron, he hasn't created them, he inherited them, but your predecessors, all of your predecessors, starting even before François Mitterrand. But let's start with François Mitterrand. It's still like, you know, Mitterrand, Chirac, Hollande. That's difficult. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. And it's getting increasingly more likely we're going to see Madame le Président. I think Le Pen, all she has to do is just wait and blink. And say, hello, I still exist. Yeah, every 3 months, say, hello, I still exist. Islam is cancer. That's all she has to do. Because there's no way you can address this efficiently. Now maybe he manages to do what, you know, the French usually do, which is basically put the misery somewhere beneath the carpet and hope nobody notices it and keep the lid on it for a little bit longer until after the election. Maybe that can succeed, I don't know. Strong doubt.
Yeah, strong doubt.
But it's worth a shot, I guess. But unless you start, you know, deporting people and you start shutting down mosques, and not just one or two, no, by the dozens per week. I don't know. Maybe they'll find their balls and do that. It's the way, and again, this is something that you will never hear in the mainstream media. It's the way Sweden did. The reason Malmö is now significantly more peaceful than it was 6 years ago is not because the adherence to the religion of peace in Malmö became more integrated or less Muslim. No. The reason this is the case is because now the FRA actually shuts down mosques and deports people.
Oh, yeah.
And has been doing so for the last 3 or 4 years. Actually, the last 2 years, a lot more. And at the beginning, at the very least, they were shutting down 1 or 2 mosques per week. It was a very, very concerted effort. And there's still some violence in Malmö, but a lot less than it used to be 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. So, mixed feelings about Macron, mixed chances after inheriting this 40-ish-year-old problem to do something about it in the next 18 months, or not even 18 months. Or at least run on the consensus that that you're spearheading a shock and awe attack against the religion of peace and the radicalization that always happens through mosques.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that he can do is kick the counterterrorism measures into overdrive and sustain them consistently not for the next 18 months, for the next 6 years. And when election comes, say, look, I've already started working on the problem. Here's the results. Re-elect me again so I can continue doing this for several more years. And eventually, slowly, we're going to flatten the curve of the religion of peace. At least that would be credible. I still doubt that would get him re-elected, but it would indeed make him stand a chance.
Well, he definitely has more political capital now to do such a thing than anyone used to have in the past.
Yes, because politics is downstream from culture, and at some point, and this is the point where 1 or 2 days after we taped the previous episode, the entire political class basically, you know what, now we're going to project the Charlie Hebdo caricatures on a huge wall in the middle of Paris, and there's nothing you can do about it. Finally, they found their balls. Probably they were hidden somewhere, and you know they just let the soy dry from them, and then, grab their baguettes. No, I'm not gonna apologize for that. I'm just not gonna apologize for that. But yeah, it is what it is. And yeah, this morning there was an attack at Nice, at a church, and another one at the Saudi consulate in, I forget the name of the city, it wasn't in Paris for sure, and another one in Paris, so basically 3 strikes in a single day. These people aren't going to stop, I'm just saying.
Yeah, but also there's another thing to consider, the external reactions to what France did. So I've seen a lot about her from Indonesia, from Pakistan, and from Erdogan, obviously.
Yeah, but Erdogan, as I'm saying, his cabinet has been a little bit weird. At some point, he called him mentally insane, but then today he expressed support for the French people against this. So it's a kind of a mixed bag with Erdogan, as usual. And admittedly, Erdogan is the one that Macron kind of has to deal with, whether he likes it or not, in the sense that you kind of have to do some diplomacy with that guy, because, you know, he's a fellow NATO country, a very, very long historical relationship between France and the Ottoman Empire. Again, whether you like it or not, it's the Ottoman Empire, even if it's smaller on the map, but it's still the Ottoman Empire, because it's led by a neo-Ottomanist, you know, the guy outright admitted so, and it is what it is. But when it comes to the bottom, I mean, come on, Gaza Strip, what are they going to do? Really? And even Pakistan, what are they going to do, really? Pray at the jinn? Really? Oh, but I've seen, there were a few Gulf countries, but we're not going to buy French perfumes. Oh, yes, you will. Oh, yes, you will. Because your wealthy woman will nag you into oblivion, and you will.
No, but the most curious one was the Indonesian Prime Minister's reaction. He actually went outright in public, agitating for killing any French person they see.
I'm sorry, that's the Malaysian president.
The Malaysian president.
Yes, not the Indonesian president, the Malaysian.
The Malaysian Prime, yeah.
Yes, the Malaysian president. Yes, he said that Muslims have a right to kill French people by the millions. Yes, I'm going to put the Twitter thread so you can watch it. I'm not joking. But then again, you know, so what? You know, what are the neighbors of Malaysia? So it's Singapore for sure. The Philippines isn't far. You know, maybe ask for the allies in the region to remind the guy that, you know, his shekels are in our empire. I'm just saying, I mean, seriously, that's how you deal with these people. You know, come again? Do you really want to see your shekels again? Oh, you don't? Okay, fair enough. Nationalized. All you have to do is just allude to that, and I'm pretty sure you'll come back and say that he was misquoted or something.
Yeah, that's a bit difficult when you go out in public and actually say that in front of hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, you know, sometimes it happens, you know. It just is what it is. So yeah, good luck, Mr. Macron. I don't think you'll succeed, but good luck. Maybe I'm wrong. You know? I've been wrong before. Usually, you know, with French politics, I don't think I was wrong that often. But, you know, maybe I'm wrong. You know, soon enough, they're gonna try to enforce a curfew with allegedly by cough reasons. Use that one too to root out Muslims, by the way. Maybe that will work. At least they're easier to find because
they'll be the ones not respecting the measures.
Yes. Not only that, but, you know, generally French people are pretty dumb and they listen to their government, which has consistently been a mistake. So as a result, they will stay at home for the most part. Which means that you'll be easier to find the friends of the religion of special needs. But then again, that would require a little bit more of balls. This he's been quoted as saying, "Oh, fear will change sides." Yeah, but you'll have to instill it. And so far, we haven't been very successful at that. I mean, remember, this article is written 2 days ago, and 2 days later, 3 terrorist strikes in the same day. So probably it's not working. Something is not working in the strategy. I'm just saying. Deutsche Welle. Merkel urges discipline as Germany molds tougher restrictions. Chancellor Angela Merkel has said a lack of discipline surrounding COVID-19 had put Deutschland back in a difficult situation. She's set to meet state leaders to decide on new restrictions to curb the pandemic. Chancellor Angela Merkel on Tuesday urged Germans to stick to what we know about the coronavirus as the country battles a second wave of infections. We know how we can protect ourselves. We can proceed with a more targeted response, she said in Berlin, but we also see with the rising numbers that if we do not stick to what we know about the virus, we get ourselves back into situations that are decidedly difficult. Merkel was speaking ahead of a key meeting with state leaders brought forward to Wednesday, at which she is expected to push for tougher restrictions to curb the spread of COVID-19. According to a report in the Bild newspaper, the government is mulling a series of new measures that include restaurant and bar closures and the ban on public events. Good luck in court with that. Schools are expected to remain open except in regions with severe outbreaks. Merkel is meeting with Germany's 16 state premiers, who she must convince to agree to the restrictions which were described by Bild as lockdown light. Measures taken to combat the coronavirus pandemic in Deutschland are decided at the state level. It's clear it won't be easy, and it's also clear it won't be pretty, said Bavaria State Premier Markus Söder, who has called for a unified nationwide approach to Germany's pandemic response. He urged federal and state leaders not to come up with half-hearted measures, but rather an effective concept. Most Germans are expecting the government to impose drastically tougher restrictions, according to a poll commissioned by news agency DPA. More than 60% of expected restaurants, shops or schools to shut. Finance Minister Olaf Scholz has echoed calls for a uniform approach. The additional measures should be targeted, temporary and focused, and they should be implemented as uniformly as possible across Germany and be generally understandable.
Generally understandable.
Generally understandable. Just try to read any piece of German legislation. What they call generally understandable, I call insanity gobbledygook. There's not going to be generally understandable. It's been a day since that meeting. I haven't been able to find any updates on what they decided. My suspicion is that they decided nothing. First of all, one has to remember that there is already court precedent in several Bundesländer that no, you cannot shut down restaurants just because cough. You have to prove that the cough is dangerous in restaurants, and guess what? There is no evidence for that.
Yeah, most likely the reason why we haven't seen any updates is because there is some significant opposition in that meeting that's been carried out.
Yes, and some of the state premiers, governors of the Bundesländer, they face re-election really soon, and as we all know, AfD is growing, and AfD
AfD is the scarecrow of the establishment in Germany.
Yes, and of course AfD's position is that all of this is insanity. Of course. Recently, AfD also got a very nice victory in court against the equal representation of men and women on the ballots and the voting booth, by basically arguing that equality is gender apartheid, and that's how they won. So, and increasingly judges across Germany, they're increasingly skeptical of all or most of these measures. So, even if Merkel manages to get to some sort of an agreement with all of the state premiers, that's still no guarantee that those will stay implemented for more than a few days until basically
they get demolished.
Some federal court says that's bollocks. Das ist Scheiße. Okay, so I'm just saying. On the other hand, my preference is for a scientific debate between the people and the authorities. Here's how I see my scientific debate. So here's in Naples a few days ago, Here's the authorities coming in to enforce the night curfew to avoid the spread of SARS-CoV-2. And here's the population engaging in a very vigorous scientific debate against the authorities. And as you can see, they bring in a lot of studies and citations. And
written on wooden sticks.
Yes, and the authorities end up agreeing with the population and fucking off from the streets. That's how I see the scientific debate between the people. The people have argued with vigorous citations that quarantine is bullshit and it doesn't work. And the authorities had to understand. If you make a compelling argument, eventually you will win the debate. And politicians aren't bad people. You just have to speak their language. And here's some footage from England. Again, if you speak their language, politicians will understand. They have to understand. Because this is the language that politicians understand. Yes, it's violence. And yes, at some point, this is acceptable. Because if you come in as a state, or like they do in, what was it? I think it was California. I didn't put the news in the podcast, but it was still, the governor comes in and says, but you can't mix with two other households and you have to be outside and the turkey has to be in individual portions, and if you can't afford that, then you have to hire someone wearing a muzzle to dole it out. I'm sorry, who the fuck are you?
Oh yes, the Thanksgiving and the Christmas guidelines on how to carry them out in California.
Yeah, who the fuck are you?
Boy.
Oh, you're the governor. Fuck you and your government. No, you don't get to do that. And that's why I'm a big fan of scientific debates between the people and the authorities. In England, they threatened that they'll send in the police to break out Christmas parties. And I'm sorry, where's your warrant? You do have a license for that. Oh, you don't? Fuck off. That's true even in England. You're not allowed to come into my house and count the number of people that are in my house. They're just not. Or like in Romania, where they tried that, and then the police have found out that about 500,000 people have bought in some very nice weapons with a lot of spikes. And, sent pictures to the police, and this is who you're going to meet if you come in at my party. And it took 2 days between that moment and the union of the police coming and saying, you know what, it's not my problem. It's not our problem if you're going to cough. We're just not getting in there. Scientific debates tend to be very fun. And a scientific debate is what's needed.
But I wouldn't be that way in the case of Germany. We've already seen...
their courts have been much more sane, yes. I think they will be demolished in court. Yeah. Presumably,
they're demolished, but in the circumstance that, in the unlikely scenario, they don't get demolished. We've already seen in the past protests that there were 200 and something thousand people out on the streets, the one at the Brandenburg Gate. So, if they decide to do this, people are going to come out, and there'll be a lot more.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very nice scientific debate. In case the Polizei
with the Bundespolizei
doesn't understand the first citation, then the people will show them the more thorough citations of their expert study.
Yeah, particularly in Berlin, when now they will no longer get the support from the neighboring lands.
Yes,
in defense of authority support.
Yes, and the police in Berlin, it's the only place in Germany where I've seen a very cocked police. That's Berlin. The police in North Rhine-Westphalia, for instance, they're very based and red-pilled and very nice people. The police in Hamburg, same thing. The Frankfurt, same thing. Very based, very nice people. The police in Berlin, I'm like, do these people they should be ashamed of them. They shouldn't be able to they shouldn't be allowed to call themselves police. Those people, in any event, of course, in France, as I'm sure many of you know, as of Friday, I think they're going to try to institute a curfew. Good luck with that. I don't think it will work. Not only in terms of the cough, but in general terms, I don't think it will work. Again, France is the place where stadiums are oftentimes full. Good luck convincing those people to stay at home. They believed you once, but they're not going to believe you the second time. They're just not. And again, if it were a serious disease, maybe I would have shown some more understanding. But it's not. The 50,000 coughs a day in France, where's the pile of bodies? There isn't one. Fuck off. No? Same thing. As for Germany, come on, Germany is very well prepared since they've been through a lot of worse cough in 2018. In 2018, need I remind you, 25,000 people died as a result of the flu. By comparison, this cough killed less than 10,000 people, I think, in Germany. So, it's just a cough, bro. Just a cough, bro. Quite frankly, I think if Germany had taken no measure, they would have this cough would still not have equalized the 17-18 flu season.
Yeah, and there's also the economic argument to be done, because if you institute a lockdown, already the Volkswagen plant in Wolfsburg closed for a month back in April, if I remember.
Now, admittedly, demand for Volkswagen is also down, so that's probably a more complicated argument to make.
Yeah, but in the same scenario, even if the demand is low, they can't afford another lockdown at the industry level.
Yes, that's
no
true.
Industry can afford that, particularly when they're facing minus 12% shrinking in the GDP.
Yes. And
let's go lower.
Yes, and there's also the more complicated issue of the cough season is just beginning. In March it was towards the end of the cough season. You only had 1 month realistically until the cough season would have been completely ended. But now you have it's October still, so November, December, January, February, March. I don't think the German industry will agree with this. But if they do, they totally deserve their bankruptcy.
Oh, yes.
Alrighty. Further to the south, BBC. Why Nigerian looters are targeting COVID-19 aid. Looting has continued in Nigeria as people targeted government warehouses holding COVID-19 aid in the capital Abuja on Monday. The raid in Gwangwalada on the outskirts of the city is the latest incident in the wave of unrest sparked by anti-police brutality protests. Looters carted away bags of rice, noodles, and sugar, among other items. The authorities have denied that the items were being hoarded so they could be shared with family and friends. State governors have said the items were kept for vulnerable members of society and in preparation for a possible second wave of cough infections. Their statement indicated that most states were waiting to flag off the distribution, an indication of an elaborate ribbon-cutting ceremony. But the explanation has not been accepted by many of those who did not receive any aid from the authorities in the months when the lockdown to limit the spread of coronavirus stopped millions of people from earning a living. There's that some of the COVID-19 aid has been found in the homes of some politicians has not helped the authorities either. A politician whose house was raided in Lagos State said he was planning to share the items on his birthday 2 days after his home was looted. The federal government has been accused of misappropriating the funds, the bulk of which had been contributed by some of the country's wealthiest people and businesses. But one of the daughters of the president, Zahra Buhari, posted on Instagram that the discovery of the undistributed aid in the warehouses showed that her father had spent the money properly. Now that people confirm that President Buhari distributed enough palliatives nationwide, it is clear that Buhari is not our problem, she posted. Almost a third of Nigeria's 36 states and the capital have seen stores attacked by looters. People have died, crushed as people crowded into the warehouses, or in some instances under the weight of the 50 kilograms bags of food. The authorities in the northern state of Adamawa told the BBC that 5 people had died at the stampede during the looting of a store there. Some state governors have imposed curfews to stem the raids, while the country's police chief on Sunday asked officers to quell the unrest. More than 400 people have been arrested in Lagos alone and will be charged, according to the authorities. In the southern city of Calabar, the state government ordered security operatives to conduct house-to-house searches and arrest those with looted items. The looters are not the peaceful protesters who demanded an end to police brutality earlier this month, but what is going on now is a continuation of the breakdown of law and order after armed thugs disrupted the demonstrations. The protesters alleged that policemen looked away as they were attacked in Lagos and Abuja. In some cases, video evidence suggests that they were encouraged by police officers to target the demonstrators, causing the death of some and injuring others. Emboldened by the silence of security operatives, they then proceeded to block major roads, extort commuters, and attack businesses before targeting the warehouses full of relief items. In one video posted online, people in the location were seen negotiating with armed military men the peaceful looting of a store, and in Kwara State, military officers guarding the warehouse told those who come to raid it to be organized as they went about it. This has been a moral issue for most people. Many have described it as outright looting and have called for an end, but there are those who feel that it is just the people collecting what rightfully belongs to them. And the actions of some of the looters has been described in terms of Robin Hood, as in taking from the rich and give it to the poor. Videos have shown looters handing out items to beggars, the aged and disabled people who could not join in the raids. But the general feeling is that the vandalism being witnessed is a byproduct of the thugs being brought in to hijack the peaceful anti-police brutality protests. Hong Kong, I forgot the noses at the previous location, but they mentioned here the some sort of a continuation of the hashtag EndSars protests. Now, SARS in this case is not the severe acute respiratory syndrome, it's the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, which is a police unit long been accused of extrajudicial killings, torture, and extortion, the African way. But in Nigeria, they had it institutionalized. These kinds of things happen in many countries of Africa, not most, but many. But in Nigeria, it was particularly egregious because it was institutionalized and sanctioned by the Abuja elite. Now, when it comes to these kinds of looting, I think it's a mixture of both. There is some corruption there is some looting there, but then there is also the good old-fashioned populism, namely that politicians kept the aid for a little bit longer just so they can make their nice ceremonies and get the nice photo ops about it and harvest votes. Yes.
Yeah, no doubt. In the case of General Africa, but particularly Nigeria.
Because whether we like it or not, Nigeria is somewhat a democracy, and you still need votes to win. And there are a lot of states where there are upcoming regional elections, and distributing some aid after the cough and whatnot, that can bring the vote, some nice votes, some very sweet votes to the incumbent. Because increasingly, even in rural areas of Africa, it's no longer popular to outright steal the elections. Slowly, most people have figured it out. Hold on a second, you're not supposed to do that. But they figured that one out. But they also, but they haven't become cucked like the Westerners. If they catch you stealing the votes, they're going to burn you alive. So as a result, now the politicians have to adapt to the new market. So bring in some very old-fashioned, old-school populism, which may still work sometimes, not always. Mugabe tried that and still lost. But no, maybe it works in Nigeria.
Yeah, but things are slightly more wild in Nigeria than they are in the case of Zimbabwe.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead. But, a little bit.
Yeah, which is why this populism tends to have a higher effect on the general population of the country. Particularly because there's a specific African mindset of if you're successful, you got to share that success with people from your family or people from your community, which is what even this article says, that even those people that looted actually did distribute some of the aid to people who couldn't join the looting, like the disabled, old people,
the disabled and whatnot. Yes.
Yeah.
What I found particularly funny is that the peaceful looting, which is a direct quote, and reminded me of something that I've seen in Namibia, where they called, it was written on an official post, they called alternative shopping practices, which is a very nice way of saying stealing. Shoplifting, actually, and not just shoplifting, but they call it alternative shopping practices. So Africa is full of these kinds of euphemisms, especially in the English-speaking Africa. The Portuguese-speaking Africa and the French-speaking Africa is very direct. They rarely engage in this kind of euphemistic gobbledygook. But English-speaking Africa is particularly funny.
It's particularly hilarious.
Yes. I guess, but even with this, The EndSars protests were particularly interesting because they spilled over even in London. I mean, in London they held an EndSars protest, which was funny. You know, the police didn't come and ask for their license to protest. So I guess spreading cough at an EndSars protest, that's okay, but spreading cough at a protest against COVID-19 measures, that's haram or something in the English United English Emirates. But on a more serious note, thing is that it's a very complicated situation because Nigeria has to, the elite, I guess, not the country overall, but the elite, they have to navigate a very narrow strip because people seem to forget. You know, remember Boko Haram? Yeah, that comes from Nigeria too. So they have to navigate. On one hand, they still do need the repressive, tools to keep that in check. Boko Haram is still there. It's no longer popular. You know, no longer the Michelle Obama no longer puts in bring back our girls and all sorts of nonsense like that, which obviously had zero effect, as anything the Obamas ever did. But on one hand, the elite, the Nigerian elite, have to keep some repressive tools for that. But on the other hand, they're under pressure to not just to democratize, but to modernize some aspects of Nigerian society, such as, you know, stealing elections a little bit less, generally send in the police, including the SARS, over peaceful people a lot less. Conduct the politics a little bit more open, a little bit more transparent, even if it is corrupt, but at least make it a little bit more transparent. And also to modernize the economy a little bit, which of course the situation with the COVID-19 doesn't particularly help, although Nigeria hasn't been severely affected. I wonder why they all...
Well, barely no country in sub-Saharan Africa got affected by the cough.
Yes.
Remember the case of South Africa, the death rate is somewhere below 0.5%.
Yes, and both Nigeria and South Africa, they do test a lot. They do treat it seriously, but it just so happens that it's an even less serious disease for them than it is for most of Europe.
There are definitely bigger issues. For example, cholera.
Yes, and the occasional outbreaks of Ebola, and things like that. I mean, there are. That's a very tough neighborhood for COVID-19. COVID-19 has to compete for attention. But yeah, so that's what the context one should be looking at. It's a country that is trying, and it's a huge country, both territorially and population-wise, but it's trying slowly to transition into a more modernized economy and somewhat functional, and whilst at the same time avoiding secessions and things like that. Secession is back in vogue in Africa, as you have seen with the case of Sudan, now split into two countries, admittedly for the benefit of both new countries. But still, secession is a thing. It's fashionable again, and Nigeria the Nigerian elite probably wouldn't want to see that happening.
Oh, definitely, because I did follow the secession of South Sudan from the Sudan, and I still remember the immense butt hurt at Khartoum, because South Sudan was the region that had almost all the oil of the country.
Yes.
and that seceded.
Yes, but
imagine if the Niger Delta would secede from the rest of Nigeria. That's all the oil being gone.
Yes. Now, admittedly, in the case of Khartoum, if you mentioned that one, eventually ended up being a force for good, because now Khartoum is slowly transitioning to a Western style of geopolitics. They'll be fine. They'll be fine. As long as they keep their Islamists in check, they'll be fine. But the same holds true for Nigeria. And keeping those Islamists in check, which are, again, numerically speaking, are a lot more than in Sudan. Keeping those in check requires forces, like the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, the SARS, which sometimes conducts extrajudicial killings, and it's not like the FBI or like the gendarmerie in France no, because it's Africa. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
By complicated, we mean sometimes using the big stick.
Yes,
a bit more often.
Yeah, and having not just one big stick, but having several spare big sticks, because sometimes you have to use it until it breaks, and you just need a new big stick. It just is what it is. I mean, eventually it's not going to be needed. I mean, these kinds of approaches will no longer be needed in Nigeria, but it's not tomorrow. It's gonna be
years,
probably 2 decades.
Oh, yeah.
Transitioning from what it is now to a way of doing politics that is slightly less insane. It's possible. It's going to happen because, you know, generations change, and the younger generation is a bit like, can we be at least semi-insane instead of fully insane? And, you know, those people will, biology dictates, those people eventually will be in power, and some of that will change, but it takes time. Society changes one funeral at a time. I'm just saying. And yes, that requires at some point, you have to find peaceful looting and alternative shopping practices. And it is what it is, man. Financial Times: US refuses to back Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as next WTO head. The US has rejected the front-running candidate to head the World Trade Organization, defying the body's other 160 member nations and leaving the outcome of the race uncertain. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, a former Nigeria finance minister, has attracted more widespread support to become the next Director General than her rival South Korea's Yoo Myung-hee, the WTO said on Wednesday. But the United States has refused to back her, a move which delays the decision on the process until after the US presidential election next week. The process requires all WTO members to reach a consensus rather than involving a formal vote. Candidates from Egypt, the United Kingdom, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Moldova, and Kenya were eliminated in the previous round. In recent days, 3 leading WTO ambassadors, nicknamed the Troika, have been holding private consultations among the Geneva-based body's members to establish which of the 2 remaining candidates attracts the widest support. Ms. Okonjo-Iweala, who holds the US as well as Nigerian citizenship, has emphasized her experience as a World Bank managing director and her role as chair of the board of Gavi, a public-private alliance to develop vaccines for low-income countries. The drive to create a COVID-19 vaccine has sparked a debate about patents, which are protected by WTO agreements. But Keith Rockwell, a spokesperson for the WTO, said the US delegates backed Miss Yu because of her 25 years of trade experience. She currently serves as South Korea's trade minister. They said she would be able to hit the ground running, Mr. Rockwell said. They said they could not endorse Dr. Ngozi. I don't know the reasons for that. In a statement, the U.S. Trade Representative's office confirmed Washington's support for Ms. Yu, describing her as a bona fide trade expert and arguing that the WTO was facing a difficult time and should be led by someone with real hands-on experience in the field. The WTO's members will next meet on November the 9th. The role became available because of the unexpected early resignation of Roberto Azevedo, a Brazilian who had held the job since 2013. He had another year remaining in his term of office, but stepped down in September. The organization is currently without an interim director general after China vetoed a U.S. suggestion that the American Alan Wolf, one of the deputy directors generals, should take over in an acting capacity. The new director general will take over at a time when the WTO's capacity to promote rules-based trade has been undermined by geopolitical tensions, including China's model of capitalism and US President Donald Trump's propensity for taking unilateral action to hit back against perceived ill treatment of American companies. They will also face a turbulent economic landscape as the cough pandemic causes growing damage to global growth. I stand with the United States on this one. I think Dr. Ngozi is an affirmative action candidate.
But it's not just affirmative action. Based on the research I've done, the company that enterprise she ran, Gavi, has some dubious implications with Bill Gates.
Oh yeah, of course. Because if it's a vaccine company in Africa, then there's Bill Gates there. Period. It's very simple.
Yeah, and also some deals with China. And
again, if there's Bill Gates there has to be China very close. What exactly is the shocking aspect here?
They said that they don't know why the US objected to Ngozi.
Well, I guess the U.S. trade representative didn't have the authority to speak on that, and is probably leaving it to Trump. And if some journalist dares to ask him on the campaign trail, why does he not endorse Dr. Ngozi, he'll probably go on another tyrant about why China man bad, which is exactly what I would do if I were Trump. I mean, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization should be led by a bona fide trade expert.
Yeah, and
the South Korean candidate seems like a very good choice.
Yeah, she is the good choice. But the problem with the South Korean candidate is that also she has an anti-China agenda, and that does not bode well when.
That's great.
Yeah, it's great, but China being the world manufacturing hub is not good for them.
Tough.
Well, it is indeed tough, but let's see those single-digit economic growth in GDP from China going on.
Yeah, no,
totally legit.
It's totally legit, of course. What I'm saying is that it's a good thing that the US has started to take WTO seriously, and it's another reason why I hope Trump is re-elected. Because no, I'm sorry, these kinds of bureaucracies have been allowed, and that's the term that I'm looking for, allowed to run amok and to work on basically, we're gonna have a consensus. No, being a world trade organization, there is no such thing as a consensus. Fuck off.
Democracy ends at the entrance door.
Yes, and I think that there should be a more what do you call it, balanced vote. That is to say, based on your economic and trade power. There shouldn't be an equal vote between China and the United States. No, there shouldn't be an equal vote between Russia and Germany, or between I don't know, Nigeria and Sao Tome and Principe. Okay, I think there should be something a little bit more balanced, and I think the U.S. vote should matter a lot more, of course, being the largest. Okay, so yeah, it will be fun. It will be fun. I don't think there will be a new chief at the WTO this year.
No, me neither.
Okay, let me put it this way.
Tensions run way too high.
But it's been just postponed until November the 9th, and it's a little bit terrible. It's after the election. I don't care who wins the election. There's not going to be a new chief at the WTO anytime soon. Unless they finally get their shit together and put in a qualified majority type of voting, where there is some weight given on economic weight to the vote. And only then that will be solved, or they just accept Mrs. Yu from South Korea. Yeah, sure. I know. Xi Jinping doesn't like it tough. Speaking of South Korea, in New York Times, a former newspaper, former South Korean president ordered back to prison for bribery. The Supreme Court of South Korea on Thursday upheld a 17-year prison term for former President Lee Myung-bak and ordered him sent back to prison. Mr. Lee, who has been president from 2008 to 2013, was expected to be taken to prison in a few days, making him the second former South Korean president behind bar on charges of corruption. Mr. Lee's successor Park Geun-hye, who was impeached and ousted on charges of bribery and abuse of power, was sentenced to 25 years in prison by an appeals court in 2018. The same year, Mr. Lee was arrested on bribery and embezzlement charges. He was successfully convicted in lower courts, but has been out on bail in recent months while waiting for the Supreme Court's final say on the case. In October 2018, the Seoul District Court sentenced Mr. Lee to 15 years in prison, convicting him of collecting 8.5 billion won, or $7.5 million, in bribes from various sources, most of it from Samsung, the country's largest business conglomerate, when he was a presidential candidate and after he took office. The court also ruled that Mr. Lee, a former executive of Hyundai, disguised his ownership of a lucrative auto parts maker under the names of relatives and embezzled 24 billion won from the company between 1995 and 2007. An appeals court added 2 years to the prison sentence in February, saying that the value of the bribes he had taken was larger than that, was 9.4 billion. On Thursday, the Supreme Court upheld the verdict. Mr. Lee, 78, collected the bribes from Samsung in the form of lawyer fees that Samsung paid to settle a lawsuit involving the auto parts company known as DAS, according to prosecutors. In return for the bribes, Mr. Lee did favors for Samsung executives, including granting a presidential pardon to Lee Kun-hee, the company's chairman, who was convicted of embezzlement and tax evasion in 2009. The presidential pardon of Lee Kun-hee was criticized at the time as an example of how collusion between politics and business has often allowed top businessmen found guilty of serious white-collar crimes in South Korea to walk free or with light punishment. The tycoon had been forced to resign as Samsung chairman in 2008 after allegations of corruption surfaced against him. But he returned to the company's leadership in 2010, just months after receiving the presidential pardon. President Lee said he had decided to grant Samsung chairman special amnesty so that the businessman could retain his membership on the International Olympic Committee and lead South Korea's bid for 2018 Winter Olympics. The Samsung chairman died on Sunday, 6 years after he was incapacitated by a heart attack. Almost all of South Korea's former presidents, as well as many of its business tycoons, have been implicated in recurring corruption scandals. 4 former prime ministers have been arrested on corruption charges since the 1990s, including Ms. Park and Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee won the presidency by promising to use his business skills to help rejuvenate the South Korean economy, but he was dogged by allegations of corruptions before and after his election. President Moon Jae-in won the election to replace the impeached Ms. Park in 2017. Like all his predecessors, he came to office vowing to root out the corrupt ties between the political elite and the country's family-owned business conglomerates known as chaebol. Gee, and I thought I thought we had a corrupt political class.
The South Koreans go to corruption at a whole new level. But in all honesty, Samsung is a pretty big industrial conglomerate. They do everything from fucking radios all the way to defense. Yeah,
nuclear, actually long-range missiles, guiding systems, and all sorts of military equipment. Yes.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, again, I thought we had a corrupt political class. I mean, really, like almost all of the presidents in the last 30 years are in jail. I mean, really.
It is kind of difficult in the case of South Korea to avoid corruption when you're faced with companies like Samsung. In all honesty. Because if you see how Mr. Lee got his funding through embezzlement.
Yes, but I think that there is a solution to that. Of course, nobody's gonna like what my solution is, but there is a solution. Well, there are 2 solutions for that actually. One of them is just get a decent law of lobbying, a lobbying act. Get it formalized. That's one solution. The other solution is antitrust. I'm just saying. Split up Samsung into 5 different companies by force.
There will be some societal pressure in terms of antitrust regulation because same way as business in Japan is carried out, most of the huge companies are owned by families.
Yes, and the chairman is actually rarely elected by board of directors and shareholders. It's usually like a dynasty.
Yeah, it is dynastic.
I think it was at the LG where recently they were just waiting for the chairman to die and recently died, and now the grandson will be taking over or things like that. So there's that. One of the many reasons I put this in here is for all those people who say that, oh, but you know, the Asians are a lot more disciplined. No. If anything, especially when it comes to financial corruption, Russia is an honest place by comparison.
Let's not consider Russia as being competitive example. Let's think of Latin America.
I think Brazil has a little bit less corruption than South Korea.
Less corruption, but the sums in Brazil are much higher than they are in South Korea. But
yes, because
proportional to the country, yes.
In South Korea, corruption is so common that nobody even notices. Whereas in Brazil, you're correct, there is a lot less corruption at the society level. But when the elite does the things like this, they don't fuck around with $8 million or $10 million. No, they talk in dozens of billions of dollars, not won. Okay.
Yeah. Well, wasn't that one? I think when you had that interview with
Professor Carvalho.
With Olavo de Carvalho's son, he talked about a nearly $1 trillion bribe to some social security agency of the state.
Yes,
and it was so widespread from all the way from the government level, from Lula to the regional state levels. That was
just the program to bring in doctors from Cuba involved bribes to the tune of $6 billion. Just the program to launder some shekels from the National Petroleum Company ended up with almost $1 trillion. Yes, and every single government program was with billions of dollars in bribes. So by comparison, the South Korean political elite is poor.
They definitely need to up their game.
They definitely need to up their game. What I'm saying is that unlike Japan, at least South Korea is trying. In Japan, it's haram to even talk about the corruption in their society. So it's going to take another generation until it will become kosher to talk about how deeply corrupt and rotten the Japanese society is. That's going to be fun. That's going to be fun. By 2040, it will become pretty mainstream to talk about the degeneration and the corruption in the Japanese society. And there's still a lot of people in the West who still think of Japan as a very civilized place, and no, it's not. It's not. No, it's not. What I'm saying is that these kinds of things should be discussed a little bit more often, because there are a lot of people in, well, not necessarily the West, but Europe and North America, let's put it this way, who ended up have been hating their own civilization quite a lot lately, and by comparison, looking up to countries like South Korea or Japan and saying that they're a lot more correct, and they're not.
No, particularly in the case of Japan with Yakuza. On what world are you living in to believe this?
Yeah. So but South Korea takes the cake on this one.
At least South Korea doesn't have as I said before, the Yakuza that the Japanese have.
They don't have the Yakuza. There are a few triads here and there, but that's still a small fish. And there are a few North Koreans who do kind of mob activity in South Korea, but still small fish, and most of that is directly bought off by the South Korean state, bribed, for intelligence. I mean, we're gonna turn a blind eye to some of your trade in the country in return for footage, intelligence, whatever from the North Korean regime. So there's that. Alrighty, a bit further to the north, BBC, China says it will impose sanctions on Boeing and Lockheed Martin over Taiwan arms sales. Beijing said on Monday that it will impose sanctions on American companies, including Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon, that have been involved in selling weapons to Taiwan. Speaking at a press conference, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Zhao Liang, called on the United States to stop selling arms to the self-governing islands and to cut military ties with the government in Taipei. Yeah, of course.
Sure.
That's going to happen. The sanctions are just the latest escalation in growing tensions between the US and China over Taiwan. Even though the island has never been controlled by China's ruling Communist Party, Beijing insists it is an integral part of its territory and has threatened to use force if necessary to assert its control. We will continue to take necessary measures to safeguard national sovereignty and interests, Zhao said. He reiterated that U.S. arms sales to Taiwan seriously violate the One China principle and harms China's security interests. Well, it's true about the latter. The exact details of the sanctions have yet to be announced, but Zhao said they will apply to relevant U.S. individuals and entities that played a negative role in the arms sales. Zhao specifically mentioned that the sanctions would affect companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and defense contractor business Raytheon. U.S. State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus condemned China's threat, saying that they were unproductive. We deplore Beijing's effort to retaliate against the US and foreign companies for their sales that support Taiwan's legitimate self-defense requirements, the necessity of which had been made abundantly clear through increasingly hostile incursions by China's Air Force, she said. Boeing said that the issue was one for governments to resolve. The US government decides on which defense systems to provide to Taiwan and then makes the arrangements with the DoD for the provision of such equipment, a Boeing spokesperson told CNN. Foreign military sales to any country or entity is a direct contractual obligation between the purchaser and the US government/DoD. Lockheed Martin similarly said that foreign military sales are government-to-government transactions and emphasized that it works closely with US leadership. Lockheed Martin adheres to US policy with regard to conducting business with foreign governments. We do business with more than 70 nations around the world, and all of our international sales are strictly regulated by the US government. Raytheon did not immediately respond to a request for comment, because Raytheon is also an intelligence business. In the past year, the Trump administration has moved to strengthen ties with Taipei, including increasing arms sales and facilitating high-level meetings between US and Taiwan officials. Last week, the US formally notified the Congress of the proposed sale of 3 advanced weapon systems to Taiwan, totaling an estimated of $1.8 billion. Just hours after Beijing threatened sanctions, the Trump administration notified Congress that it had approved of a proposal of $2.37 billion arms sale to Taiwan, which consisted of 100 Harpoon coastal defense systems. That's why I want Trump to be re-elected. Beijing says they don't like it. Fine, then double it, please. Just literally double down on it. Add another 2.37 billion on top of the 1.8 billion. Yeah, go ahead, because you're the expert on that area.
Well, these sanctions will do nothing because
I don't think China even has the courage to apply them, to enforce them. Yeah, sure, they'll say anything, but
they'll most likely implement it, but there are final details in the middle. What they plan on employing sanctions to are the defense arms business parts of the companies, which do little to no business whatsoever in China. So this is just a big measuring contest, saying that if you do sanctions, we'll do sanctions.
Yeah, but
Boeing Defense doesn't do anything in China. Lockheed Martin again doesn't do anything in China, and Raytheon to some extent it has a parent a subsidiary of Raytheon. Has some contracts with the Comac, which is the Chinese plane manufacturer, but that's about it. So these sanctions will not affect these companies in the least bit because they do no business in China whatsoever.
They're not allowed to anyway.
And not only they're not allowed, but even if they were allowed, they don't have. They don't have any business whatsoever.
They don't have a license for it.
They don't. It's not that they don't have a license, that nobody is interested, period.
Yeah, I somehow doubt that there is huge enthusiasm at Boeing Defense to sell weapons to the CCP. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So yeah, it's like, I would impose sanctions on Amazon. I never use Amazon, And I would announce that, I'm going to boycott Amazon. I never use Amazon, ever. So, yeah. It's pretty much like, because, again, we're talking about the CCP here. It's pretty much like those leftists who claim to boycott various conservative companies. You're not using their service, their product anyway. So, who cares? Okay. Yeah, just like... better example, poor, like Gaza Strip. We're gonna boycott French products. You're not buying French products anyway. Who cares? So yeah, we're gonna. Okay.
Yeah, they're gonna boycott Levashkiri.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Final article, a little bit long, but okay. Australia, BBC, COVID. Melbourne's hard-won success after a marathon lockdown. Melbourne's grinding second coronavirus lockdown began in the chill of winter. In early July, the nights were long and dark, and Australia's cultural capital was confronting the terrifying reality of another deadly wave of infections. More than 110 days later, experts say it is emerging as a world leader in disease suppression alongside places including Singapore, Vietnam, South Korea, New Zealand, and Hong Kong. Rena McIntyre, a biosecurity professor of University of New South Wales Kirby Institute, told the BBC that Australia's response had been light years ahead of the US and the UK. Yes, because you're a penal colony. It is just thoroughly shocking when we think of pandemics. We don't think that well-resourced, high-income countries are going to fall apart at the seams, but that is exactly what we have seen, she said. At the end of Tuesday, Melbourne's 5 million residents will see an end to strict stay-at-home orders that put an entire city into a type of protective custody. When the restrictions are lifted, Melbournians will have endured one of the world's longest and toughest lockdowns. It's been controversial, calamitous for jobs, and crushingly hard for many, but health specialists believe it has worked. Fact check false. Well, okay, they believe it worked, it didn't. There is cautious optimism that with very low case numbers, the worst is over. No, it's not. I'm pretty proud of what we have achieved here, says Professor Sharon Lewin, director of the Doherty Institute in Melbourne. Who the hell are these people? The outcome has been extraordinary, not without its pain, though. On Monday, Melbourne reported no new daily cases for the first time since June. In early August, it was recording more than 700 daily, and dozens of people were dying. The Victorian state capital was at the heart of an unfolding public health crisis. And in other parts of Australia, which had mostly contained COVID-19 people, held their breath. Europe and the US are facing enormously high numbers. In Victoria, we had an isolated outbreak pretty much just in Melbourne, and the rest of the country had extremely low and in many cases, in many states, zero numbers, Professor Lewin told the BBC. We had absolutely no choice but to go into a significant lockdown, that's fake news, if we were going to rejoin the rest of the country, and that gave us motivation. Okay, well, okay, mate. Face coverings became mandatory in Victoria, and a nighttime curfew blanketed Melbourne. Life retreated indoors while on the front line of an invisible war. A growing number of casualties, including healthcare workers and nursing home residents. I believe the latter part. The true impact of mental health may never be known. Oh, trust me, you will know it. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews said the state is ready to take steady steps towards that COVID normal summer and the COVID normal Christmas. But there is no premature sense of triumph. More than 900 COVID-19 related deaths have been reported in Australia. The virus has not been eliminated, and vigilance will need to trump apathy and complacency. We can't manage to contain the disease unless we change the way we live, until we can have enough vaccines that are effective enough for everyone, warned Professor McIntyre. We can't just go into denial and wish our lives were back to normal. It's a once-in-a-lifetime natural disaster of catastrophic proportions. Well, I agree with that. The disaster is not natural, though. It is of catastrophic proportions, but it's not natural.
It's not because of the virus.
You are at fault for it.
Yep. Exactly.
Not for the cough. No, for the cough is China's fault. But for what you did, it's your fault.
Yeah, entirely your fault. But
and it's not going to work.
Yeah, but it's impressive reading these articles from Australia and New Zealand in particular, how high on their own shit they are.
Yes, and
amazingly.
It's going to be glorious to watch their bankruptcy come 21.
Yeah,
especially second quarter of 21. Just as the winter starts down under, it's going to be glorious to watch their bankruptcy. At least in Australia, the rural parts have been left alone, so it's probably not going to be that bad. But Miss Jacinda in the neighboring New Zealand, Kiwis are fucked. They really are. And what I find, 4 months ago I would have said that this is worrisome. Now I don't find it worrisome. I just find it shockingly stupid. If I were Professor McIntyre, I would shut the fuck up. Yeah. I mean, I would just say, okay, thank God the people were stupid enough to follow my rules. Let's just pretend that this didn't happen, and hopefully not many people learn about it.
Yeah, but even...
The one thing that I wouldn't do is brag in the international media about it. Because 6 months from now, it will be obvious for 100% of the people that this was all for nothing. For sure. There's just no debate about it. It will have been all for nothing. And as for the, but we'll never know the true impact on the mental health. Oh, yes, you will. Oh, yes, you will.
Oh, yes, you will, particularly when you've kept people inside their houses, being basically pretty much house arrest.
House arrest for 3 months.
Because that's how, not 3 months, more like 4.
It says 110 days. That's 3 months. 4.
No,
sorry, almost 4.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
almost 4.
months.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, pretty much almost 4. Nearly 4 months. Anyways, we've seen this also last week when we talked about
New Zealand.
About New Zealand. How courageous could they be to brag about how they handled the pandemic, not just in Australia but also in New Zealand. Now we see the Australian example of the part, and as we've seen, it's all right now because let's remember, in the southern hemisphere now it's nearly summer, so temperatures are going up, and it's obvious that they will not have a lot of cases, because the reason why, I don't even know why this woman talks about the North America and Europe have a lot of cases. Because it's winter, it's cold season,
it's the cough season.
It is the cough season, as we said several times over the course of this SOFA report. So there's no surprise here, and there's no reason to brag about this. But also containing the virus with such draconian measures, because there's no other word to put it lightly. It will not only have catastrophic effects on mental health, but it will also have catastrophic effects on the economy. And I've read
and eventually on the health itself. Kindly reminder, the light recession of 2008-2009 created 200,000 extra deaths globally as a result of people not affording cancer screenings. So just on cancer alone, 200,000 excess mortality, just on that very light recession, right? So you're telling me that this has saved lives? No. Absolute. That's a lie. It just is a lie. And I think that those of us on the denier front should stop being polite about it. No, these people have committed crimes against humanity.
And
the punishment for that should be hanging in the public square.
Yes, we definitely hope these people, both from Australia and from New Zealand, who actively shield for such repressive measures, coming 6-9 months from now, being hanged in the middle of the city. At the public show, preferably.
I hope I'll be invited to the execution to get that camera and videotape from very nice angles. And I'm only half joking. I mean, I'm joking with the videotaping, but I really hope these people do not die of natural causes. I really do. Because as far as I'm concerned, these people have committed crimes against humanity, and they should not be allowed to get away with it. One thing that I hope it's gonna be achieved in terms of Overton window, if you want, over the whole thing, is a drastic decline in experts. As far as I'm concerned, at least until 2030, if not more, if an expert is speaking, it should be assumed it is an intentional lie until expressly proven otherwise by non-experts. I'm serious. Because, again, the lady at the grocery store is much more trustworthy than 100% of the professors in Australia and New Zealand. All of them. All of them are significantly dumber than the lady at the grocery store in any country you want, including Australia and New Zealand. Okay?
Yep.
It's really that simple. And the fact that but again, at least in Australia, it's only Victoria. Most of the rest of the country has been left alone. But still, even so,
to some extent, but there have been repressive measures. Okay, slightly more tame than they were in Victoria, but Victoria is a pretty radical example that actually happened, and it's been actually kept like that. We've seen over the course of these past few months videos coming out from Victoria State in particular of people getting hauled out from their houses because they broke the quarantine, or they weren't social distancing, or they were out 5 minutes after curfew on their way to their home.
As I was saying on a forum a few months ago, looking at the footage from Melbourne in particular, China looks like a democracy by comparison.
Oh yeah.
And I wasn't joking. These people went beyond Mao. And just like I think Mao should have been hanged in the public square, just the same thing I think has to happen to Professor McIntyre and all of the rest who shielded and approved for this insanity. And as long as they're alive, I think that there is injustice being perpetrated. These people should be quarantined forever, I'm just saying. Or even better, they shouldn't be hanged. No. Put them in a glass box in public view and don't feed them. Don't give them water, don't give them food, don't give them anything. It's just quarantine. How about 14 days quarantine? Or maybe 21, just to be on the safe side. Maybe you cough. 21 days should be enough. And we just get to watch.
Yeah, but on the economic front, I've seen some samples of actually asking the right questions as to what is the cost exactly the cost of this quarantine.
I didn't put the article there, but you'll be leaving it in the low
yes, it was an article from New Zealand of one of the best places to go ski in that country, which is close to, for the North American audience, Aspen, or in the case of the European audience, pretty much any ski resort from the Alps, particularly from the Swiss side or the Austrian side. They've also complained about what economic effect will...
The city is adjusting to a life without tourists, which is a very nice way of saying the city is adjusting to a life with starvation.
Yeah, with starvation.
Or, okay, not starvation, but reducing the standard of living to Ceausescu era. The late 80s, not the 70s, The late 80s Ceausescu era.
Yeah.
That will be fun.
Yeah.
And if you think that's not gonna elicit, not protests, no.
Outright riots.
Riots. If you think that's not gonna elicit riots, I got a bridge to sell to you. I have a very cute, huge bridge in Malmö that I would like to sell it to you. I'm serious. Of course, it's gonna take some time. People don't riot out of starvation in 2 days.
No, yet.
It takes them time, but they always do. You know how Maduro buys his lack of riots? By giving them food. Via contraband, via various means, but that's how, because again, as a Chinese company patented this proverb, hunger is the best teacher. Australians may be inmates, because it's a penal colony, but even inmates have to eat. And hunger will teach them a very valuable lesson about scientific arguments. Just like I've shown you earlier in Italy.
Yes, it's going to get ferociously scientific. And it will definitely not get better in the case of the land down under.
It's going to be a vigorous debate between the people and the authorities, and it's going to be a debate about mental health, a debate about the economic consequences of this nonsense, and even a debate about the cough itself. It's going to be with a lot of citations, and probably the citations will not be as friendly as they are in Italy.
Oh no.
Especially in Australia. Yeah, sure, the city dwellers no longer have guns, but the rural areas do.
And a lot.
And a lot of them. And many of the city dwellers have friends in the rural area, and they might ask, can you please give me that citation that you have buried? Because I need to cite something to Professor McIntyre.
No, for Professor McIntyre and everybody else, shooting them will be way too nice.
Yeah, that would be too nice. Yeah, but Australians are very polite and nice, so I'm just saying. Same thing with Professor Lewin and all of these shills. That's why I'm asking, who the hell are these people? Because again, coming back to the one how we opened the episode by quoting Ted Cruz, who the hell elected these people? I'm serious. Who the hell elected these people? And if the answer is nobody, then why listen to them? And I would extend it even further. All the politicians who listen to these people should be in the same regime.
Should meet the same fate.
Yes. And it will happen. Patience and tobacco, it will happen. Again, Australians are nice and very polite people, and descendants of a penal colony and whatnot. So we like to joke a lot. But one thing is certain: When hunger hits, and it will, especially in New Zealand, admittedly more than Australia, when hunger hits, all bets are off. Because you don't want to trigger the animalic nature of man. And you're getting very close to that. And you will know the consequences for mental health as well. Oh, you will definitely expect more serial killers 20 years from now in Australia. I'm serious. The children of today stayed under house arrest and ran after by the police and things of that. Some of those, not many of them, but it's enough. If it's 100,000 children, 2 of them will be serial killers for sure, and another 2 very likely. Expect a lot more interpersonal violence behind closed doors at first, and then in the streets. It will happen. The mental health consequences will be unbearable. The economy will be fine in 5 years or 6 years. There's going to be a huge recession, whatever. In 6 or 7 years, it will be fine. But the mental health costs inflicted upon children, that will stay with you for 50 years. Because formative moments have been kidnapped from them for absolutely no reason. Reminder, no kid statistically dies from COVID-19. No kid at all. So, they're poking fun at Europe. At least Europe finally got this one right. Nobody is shutting down schools anymore. Great. They should have never been shut in the first place. But at least Europe got this one right. They didn't. And you're going to pay for it dearly. You're not going to like it. It's not going to be fun at all. I'm just saying. But hey, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, in the businesses, there's something called opportunity costs. The opportunity cost for these measures against just a cough, bro, will be immense, and they will be so huge that at one point they will not be capable to be justified, and then it will get ugly. It will surely get ugly, and we're gonna be here to report the ugliness of it.
The sofa will still be here, and we'll probably show you footage from the scientific debates between. Admittedly, there have already been some scientific debates. I mean, at some point there was some mainstream journalists from there reporting about whatever, and like 100 people gathered behind the camera and started shouting bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. There's already been the incipient signs of, and again, the so-called lockdown wasn't over yet, and you already had those. The coming weeks will be fun already,
and the coming months will become huge.
Yep, and by next year around this time, it will be glorious. It will be glorious. All right. With all of that being said, thank you all for watching. And I'll see you next week, either to drink leftist tears or to drink Republican tears. Oh, man. Maybe Biden wins. It's possible. Come on, it's possible. Very unlikely, but it's possible. It is possible. But if that will be the case, it will not be Biden winning. It will be Trump losing. As just Trump said, it's a little bit unfair to him that the opposition is so terrible, because it would be extra shameful for him to lose. So he has to fight harder than usual. Man, the energy this guy has. I mean, just following his rallies on YouTube when they're broadcasted live, because almost all of them are, just following those, and it's tiresome. But imagine being Trump, just having to physically travel all across the country all the time, and always be on the stage, and always be up on your game. The energy this guy has.
Yeah, he's high energy.
Very high energy.
High energy.
Yeah, and wasn't that a long-term effect? Long COVID, as the penny cards are now? Really? I mean,
I came back stronger. Yeah.
And again, he's 74 stuffing burgers in him. Maybe it's just a cough, bro. I'm just saying, maybe it's just a cough, bro. All right. See you next week. Thanks for watching. Cheers.